We'll see.
All right. All right, well, we're gonna get going because we have so much to cover in this class. But first of all, thank you everyone so much for being here. This is a class on native plant propagation, and the last hour or so of the class, maybe half hour to hour, we'll be going over nursery management. Whether it's like a little home nursery that you wanna put together, or you wanna start a nursery program for your organization or wherever you are. My name is Francesca Claverie. My pronouns are she, hers. I am the Native Plant Program Manager at Borderlands Restoration Network, and started this native plant program in 2013.
My name's Perin. My pronouns are she, her. I started with Borderlands in 2015 as an intern, and then grew as a employee, and now I'm the assistant manager for our native plant program, and I mostly do like seed lab, seed collection type of stuff.
And we want to mention before we get this class going to do a quick land acknowledgement for the lands we're here on in Southern Arizona. They're mostly Tohono O'odham lands, but also for the dozens of other tribes and language families and culture that have both used these plants and also reside in the Southwest US, Northwestern Mexico, and this region in which we work. So the way we're going to set this class up is we're going to do a quick intro to our native plant program. We're going to talk very briefly about seed collection, partly because Perin put together a wonderful presentation on that recently that is all recorded, that was in collaboration with Watershed Management Group. And then we're going to talk about seed germination, transplanting, cuttings, and a little bit about nursery management. We will take a break about halfway through. I think we'll do a little bathroom break about halfway through. But the goal of this is to do about 2 hours of presentation and then have time for discussion and questions. Once again, this is recorded, so no worries if you do have to run out for a bit. That's totally fine, and we'll send out the link later. All right, so for a quick intro into our native plant program, there are currently a handful of us working in this program. Perin and I work about full-time. Travis Gherkins works 30 hours and helps with all things seed collection, is also responsible for most of the nursery building that's happened, like all the creative structure work. If you ever have a chance to visit the nursery or come to one of our in-person classes, we always make sure Travis is there, even though he absolutely hates to talk about his work, partly because he just has all the answers for that kind of maintenance and building and like creative construction type work. Casey Jacobs has just started working with us and helps us a couple days a week. And then we're really lucky to have Ralphie Padilla with us full-time right now, just through the summer, to help us get plants propagated and watered this summer. And then he'll be back in the winter, which I'm really excited about, taking advantage of some local college kids who come back on breaks. We also couldn't do any of the work that we do without our wonderful volunteer team. We work with a lot of gap year programming and a lot of different organizations from the US and Mexico that come and help us, as well as just a really great cadre of local badass volunteers that come multiple times a week and help us propagate everything and pull weeds and are just really fun to work with. Our mission with the Native Plant Materials Program is to promote biodiversity and provide individuals, community, and land managers access to restoration quality plant materials and guidance for effective. So most of the plants that we're propagating are going out into the wildlands for restoration projects. And then recently in the last few years, we've been making the plants available more for the public to buy, our seeds and plants for the public to buy, as a way to help fund the native plant program and get more plants in general put out into the wildlands. We do have a discount for partner organizations and agencies that wish to buy our plants in bulk. So we don't have to do a retail price. And as a nonprofit, we don't have a sales tax. So this class we've been offering for a few years, and starting last year, we put it online. And we want to highlight, I really want to highlight this one nursery that came to our very first class a few years ago and now has a full-blown nursery, and they just came back a few days ago to visit. And it's the Oracle Community Gardens and Nursery. And they're just setting up, their photos are on the right here. They're already starting to do grow outs for different restoration projects. And in general, we've only been doing this work in Southern Arizona since 2013. And we're so supportive of anyone that wants to either open a native plant nursery or just do more nursery work. We don't have a weird competitive thing about it, where we just really think that the future to restoration in general, especially with native plants, is for everyone to feel really empowered to grow your own plants, to share your own plants. If that means opening a nursery or just getting more into it somehow. We just really think that every single watershed should have a native plant program in the world. And then you can have communities like we're here in the upper Santa Cruz watershed, where we can just do more of this work as a team and as a community. Perry, I want to talk about provenancing a little bit, and like how in general with our native plant work, how we think about genetics in the landscape.
Yeah, and we'll briefly cover this because we also might at some point do another seed collection workshop in the fall. But basically, you heard Francesca mention earlier restoration quality plant materials. And usually what we mean when we say that is plant materials that are sourced as locally as possible to the site where they're going to be planted to account for local adaptations in those plants' genotypes. So there's a lot of different research and just like anecdotal evidence of plants doing a lot better, especially in settings where there isn't supplemental irrigation and they can't really like be babied in the same way. So not necessarily your yard or garden where you can kind of put seeds from wherever and help them along to survive. But in these more non-cultivated types of landscapes where there's no supplemental irrigation, you will have a better chance at survivorship and thriving, reestablished plant communities. The seed or the container plants that you're using, that you're putting into the ground, are collected as near to the planting site as possible. So the way we do that is with every seed collection that we do, we take a lot of different notes on the provenance information. And for us, usually the most important factors to consider are the mountain range and watershed, and then elevation is a huge one. So we mostly try to stay within like the upper Santa Cruz watershed and similar elevation range as our planting sites. And obviously this is very variable, but in general, you can find seeds of the same species, like some of our grass species that are grown, over in Oregon or Texas. And in general, it's amazing that those species occur over there and people are farming them for seed and are providing that native seed source. But ideally, moving those seeds hundreds of miles to a planting site is not as ideal. So what we do is we collect really locally. We get permits from Forest Service or collect on different friends' lands. We have people coming to us all the time being like, oh, I have this plant like over by my house if you're interested in coming to get seed. So we go out and do selections. We write down the kind of like ecotype or biotic community. So is it low Sonoran desert scrub, or is it semi-desert grassland, or maybe it's like Madrean oak woodland. And then we write down many of the associated species that we can see to kind of get like a snapshot of where that plant is growing. We do GPS coordinates and elevation and watershed and kind of aspect direction, mountain range, kind of on and on. And then we put all this information into like a really simple database that keeps track of all this provenance info.
And we didn't come up with this either on our own. This is from the 2012's National Seed Strategy recommended this, and is part of that idea of, if every watershed had a native plant program kind of thing. But this is, the rationale, the fancy rationale behind why that's super important. We have a lot of, we've gone through a lot of different native plant projects throughout the years. You can find them mostly on the website. The main one that we want to highlight is probably our bat work that I'll talk about a little bit, mostly because in one of the last little symposium Zoom things we were on, someone from Guanajuato was like, the most important thing that you can do is just talk to people more about, you know, this issue. And we're like, yeah, that's a great idea. We'll bring that up today a little bit. Most of the plants that we grow, about 75% of all the plants that we grow in the nursery, and probably 80 to 90% to like 95% of all the seed that we collect and grow goes out for restoration plantings, watershed restoration plantings. Our biggest project that we're working on over the next couple of years is funded by the Wildlife Conservation Society. And this is a project that we're mostly implementing at the Wildlife Corridor property in Patagonia. And we're growing out about 4,000 plants for this project and collecting quite a bit of seed that will be put on the landscape over the next couple of years. This project is also paying for this class today, which is why this is a free class that we'll have available, and the link will be available, where Perin and I can charge our time to this class, and really explain how native plants are produced, but also how you can produce native plants in your yard. Some of our native plant campaigns in the past, we had first started out, the reason that our program even exists is from a hummingbird project that we did, where our founder had a grant through Partners for Fish and Wildlife, and they were growing out about 150 different species of native plants for hummingbirds that were riparian plants. And this was around the time that the National Seed Strategy came out from BLM, and they realized that there wasn't a source from our local riparian areas. There weren't enough plants and seeds that had been collected. So that was why our nursery first started. We've also done a lot of work with growing out different species of milkweeds for monarchs. They're the host plant for the monarch butterflies. Our Agave for Bats programming has been happening since 2017. Recently, we've gotten way into oaks and have learned a lot about oak propagation. We'll be sending out like this whole booklet one of our interns put together on oaks. The more I think about restoration, especially in this mid-elevation area, the more I just want everyone to be growing oaks, like collecting acorns and growing oaks. And some of the most beautiful oaks I've seen in the largest containers is from a volunteer in Tucson who like grew out 10 beautiful emery oaks that we just planted in the park as part of a project here in Patagonia. And then we also have this great wild crop relative, mostly survey and voucher program. So this can, native plant work can be from like just keeping track of what plants are in the area to propagating things to collecting seed. Yeah, so many different fun things. Really quickly, instead of getting too into it, our Agave for Bats program mostly is just about letting agaves flower. Most agave species only flower once in their life, and often those plants are eaten back by wildlife or are harvested for agave spirits, or I know like landscapers that just don't think the flowers are ugly and think that they'll live longer if the quiotes, if the flowering stalks are cut off. So we do so much education work and also restoration plantings, and are also working on some policy work with the state of Sonora around Bacanora certification. And just want to always remind people, since that's a huge part of what we do these days, that agaves should flower. They're incredibly important to all kinds of pollinators, especially nectar feeding bats that are under a lot of stress right now. But I just had to do an agave plug. We'll talk a little bit about agaves with propagation. And there's so many wonderful organizations also partnering work in Mexico and in Sonora. We work a lot with the Colectivo Sonora Silvestre, but also partner with so many other groups. Having a project like the Agave and Bats program is really fun because people get excited about it. They're both very charismatic species. With restoration, we do focus on really charismatic flora and fauna often, because even though there's hundreds and hundreds of different species that depend on restoration work, in order to educate people about it and get people excited, it's easiest to focus on a couple. Perin is going to speak briefly on our seed collection program, maybe like a sentence or two on ethical harvesting.
Yeah.
And then before we get into the rest of the propagation.
So what you're seeing here is a really basic seed collection form that we use, kind of what I was mentioning before. This is some of the data we write down when we go out and do seed collection. And in general, I can go on and on, but basically we follow pretty strict protocols, mostly ones that have been developed by the Bureau of Land Management Seeds of Success program, which is a program to conserve biodiversity kind of all over the US. And there's a lot of different collections of the same species, but like in different areas that are studied and stored in Bend, Oregon in a seed bank over there. And so basically the protocols for seed collection, pretty simple. I don't know if anybody's read Braiding Sweetgrass. It's such a beautiful book. I really recommend the audiobook, but she has a whole chapter in there called the Honorable Harvest. And there's even like a very short version that's kind of like the same protocols that we use. It's basically like, you don't collect the first, you don't collect the last, you never take more than half. You assume that somebody is coming before you and you assume somebody will come after you. And that's kind of like the basis for it. And on top of that, it's basically like no more than 50% from an individual and no more than 20% from a population, which different species have different rules for how big their populations are based on how they are pollinated. And then in general, just with seed collection, we really learn to also get a sense for like when is an appropriate time to collect based on the health of the population. And in general, something, I think Carla's here, I think Carla said this in one of the workshops that she did, that I love, that I feel really resonates, is that if you've never felt like a group of plants has told you like, now is not a good time to collect, you should probably revisit your collection protocols. In general, you don't want to collect from a group of plants that's being encroached on by maybe like a very invasive, aggressive, like monotypic stand of something, or maybe if it just looks unhealthy or has suffered a recent burn, that kind of thing. You kind of get an idea. You want to collect from a robust, healthy population that that is reproducing well enough that that it has an abundance of seed.
Yeah, and we will probably do another whole seed collection workshop. We haven't done as many of them, partly because in the fall, we're incredibly busy collecting seed. This year, Perin is leading the biggest seed collection effort we've ever done, which is 200 pounds? About 200 pounds of clean seed, which ends up being hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And so this is a 10-person crew that's going out and collecting seed. We're trying to do more and more field grow outs to produce our own seed, which can be a little tricky, but overall you can get more bang for your buck of being able to collect more of the seed, and you're not putting the same kinds of pressures on wildlands. The last couple of years has been really, really rough seed collection. We skipped last fall entirely. The price of seed has gone way up, but you also realize when you're out in the wild that you get that sense of like, this is not a great time to collect. Thank goodness for the little prickly poppies though. They're really delivering this year. The little like cowboy eggs, I think they call them. That's what so much of the seed collection is for us this spring. Everything else has had a really hard time. So with that, we're going to get into container plant production of native plants. Usually we set this class up where we're going to talk about containers and soils first, because people always have questions about those before we get into the physical propagation and germination of the seed or plant material. When you're propagating things in containers, when you're trying to grow native plants in containers, it's such an unnatural thing in general. So you have to kind of come at it from that angle a little bit. People often think, oh, it's, I'm trying to recreate the soil horizons in the pot, in the soil that I'm using. But the most important thing to remember is that it's already so strange for the plant to try and come up in a nursery setting. It does it though, and you then like can grow the plants faster. But with the amount of water that you end up having to use, it's not necessarily the most sustainable thing. The goal is to just get more native plants into production and eventually in your yard or out on the landscape. But I do think it's important to not think of it automatically as some like supernatural process, the way that we go about this in a nursery. The first thing I want to talk about is like plastic pot production, or I guess what kind of containers you're using. In Mexico, you buy like these basically plastic bags, which is really an efficient and good size to propagate things in. Part of the issue is that they end up not being very reusable. We mostly buy, we like to go to Stewie and Sons, which is a company in Oregon that produces tree containers, pots for tree production. And so these are great for restoration because they're often a lot longer than the standard nursery industry. They're like 4-inch by 10-inch, kind of like these long cube pot cylinder things. They're also just really, really hardy, and they have air pruning abilities. So we do produce a lot of things in the standard 1-gallon pot, partly because people bring us the 1-gallon pots and they're great to reuse. The problem with using that size long-term is that you often can get a lot of root binding if the plant has to hang out in that pot for a long time. The air pruning that you see in these little 67 trays with these like long 5-inch tubes up top that Perin's holding in the photo, and the same with these 4x10 pots on the bottom, is eventually when the roots hit the bottom of the pot, instead of hitting plastic, it hits air. And so the roots, instead of turning around and like circling or going in a different direction, just like hang out on the air pruned and are already facing the right way, which is awesome for restoration or for even just establishing something in your yard. But I mean, you can really grow, I don't know, a plant in any kind of plastic thing that has drainage. You just need to make sure it has holes in it, is the bottom line. But we highly recommend using, like, cleaning up and reusing plastic. We also love this like 67 tube length that you see the agaves growing in. We grow most of our grass plugs and most of like all kinds of baby plants. We love this size. We use like a little pen or a stick to push them up out of the bottom of the pot, and they can actually hang out in this size for a really long time, and it saves a lot of space. On the bottom left, this is a size that we are using for this restoration project in Horseshoe Bend National Park up north. And this is like a really long, it's like almost a foot long tube that's really narrow on top. And with restoration plantings, you want there to be maximum root development with very little like green and herbaceous growth on the top. Because when you think about the plant, when you're at a nursery, you want to buy like a big, pretty, charismatic plant. When you're thinking about getting that plant established, though, the most important thing are the roots. So we'd really like, I'm really just driving home at this point, the like long rooting depth. But also like what Perin's doing in the top left picture up here, we often like also can just use boxes, little like wooden boxes, and then put some newspaper in it so the soil doesn't fall away. So you really can be creative and just think about how the plant is going to grow over time, and how it's going to develop before it's transplanted or into. This is what a little snapshot of our propagation forms look like. You saw the very similar one for seed collection. On these, we give it a propagation number. It doesn't matter if you're using, if you're like writing down all of this information for propagation. The important thing though is that you do write down information when you propagate the plant. And I'm the worst at this. and just have been drilled over time to write everything down, but even like the name of the plant, because you think you'll remember what you sowed or what you're propagating, and you really do lose track. So for our level of things, we really like to figure out a success rate of how well the methods we're using to propagate plants work. So we can say, like with the Salvia lemanii cutting, it's like, oh, we're down to like almost 85% success rate. That's fantastic. And then can store this information in our database. And then we refer to it all the time because we don't remember exactly what we have to do often to like get plants to be successful. If you're working with a species of plant, especially one that we might have grown that's around our area, and you have any questions, we don't have this database available online. You can't just go through it, but we ask other nurseries all the time what they did to propagate different plants. Other nurseries ask us all the time. So if you are trying to grow something, shoot us an email and ask us, and we'll look it up in the database and see what we can do and what we find in there. If you discover something, or like, let us know. It's just so fun to share information on what works and what doesn't work. Our nursery for our container plants and for our seeds, we now, as of just a few months ago, you can go through everything online, and all the plants that are available to the public, we have nice descriptions of. The same for the seeds, the different categories of seeds. And we just shut down our nursery for the next 2 weeks, partly to do this class and also to take a break before our monsoon plant sale. So on Saturday, July 17th from 8 to 3, we'll have a monsoon plant sale. But yeah, anytime like outside of there or that time, if you want to come visit, just shoot us an email and we'd love to meet with you. Before Perin starts talking about specific germination details, we want to give a shout out to our substrate, our soil substrate that we use. And this is one of, I think this is probably the most important part of propagating any plant. Like containers are important, of course, where you want to have good solid plastic or wood or whatever it is that you're using. But this substrate is actually incredibly important. People often think, well, why can't I just dig up some soil in my yard and use that? But the problem is, because if you're using just native soil and you're not adding drainage to it, the fact that you have to put that soil in a plastic or wooden container or some kind of container changes all the soil science around how soils work in nature and in the wild. So the most important thing, and especially for native plants of the West, is drainage, like drainage. We order our soil mix from Tank's Green Stuff in Tucson, and we, after consulting a lot with Steve Plath, one of our very favorite native plant propagators. Steve is the nursery manager for Gila Watershed Partnership in Safford. He recommended some mixes and different combos, and then we ended up settling, I think as of even recently, I think we've updated it since this last one. But we do in equal parts now, equal parts perlite, equal parts cinder sand, equal parts compost, and equal parts cocoa chip, which is even different from like the last time we gave this class, which is kind of cool. And so it's something that you kind of like keep working on your soil media and like just figuring it all out. This is for the massive, all the yards that we get like these big piles of soil delivered. But it makes a huge difference. And even when I had first come on to Borderlands and in Patagonia, there were so many species that some of our friends who were trying to grow the plants for restoration were having a hard time with, just because there wasn't enough drainage. And you then, if you don't have the right soil, you're susceptible to all kinds of diseases, all kinds of rot. And we actually use this mix for everything. We germinate our seeds in this mix. If we could do it differently, we'd probably use a sifter and like sift off some of the bigger materials. But we use this for our agaves. It's just a great all-purpose mix. If we had more funding, it would be fun to have like different piles of things for like succulents and for, our penstemon mix or whatever. But as an all-purpose mix, it's important to have something with nutrients, to have something with drainage, but most importantly, find something that works really well for where you are and what kind of humidity you have in the air, all of that. But in the West, drainage is probably the most important thing. So now that we've thought about pots a little bit, we've thought a little bit about soil, Perin is going to get into the specifics of seed propagation.
Cool, thank you. And my apologies if you're hearing the dogs whine and pant. They're being really wild, running in and out of this office here. Okay, seeds. I love seeds. I always like to start off our seed propagation section just with some reverence for these incredible the incredible adaptation of producing seeds at all. And I think one of the things that's always important to remind people is that seeds are not inert, inanimate objects, right? Which oftentimes you think of plants as seeds as these separate things. But seeds are living, breathing beings, and they are plants. Seeds are plants. So seeds have all of the parts of a mature plant. They have their embryonic leaves and shoots and roots, and then nutrition that allows them to kind of lay in wait until the right time to germinate comes along. And so they're truly plants, and they're respirating, albeit at a low level that allows them to kind of just sit and respirate just enough to live until they're ready to germinate. How do I switch this?
I'll do it.
Okay. Oh yes, here's a seed germinating, which is a totally magical thing to witness. And we can just go to the next one. And with seeds, with germination, the tricky thing with seeds, and I guess with our work and some of the seed to plant work that we do, is that our seeds, the seeds that we work with, are non-cultivated, right? So as opposed to a lot of the seeds that you might think of in a garden setting, like vegetable seeds that have been cultivated and bred for very specific qualities and to trust people, and that's been something that's happened over generations and generations and generations of people working with plants, is that the non-domesticated seeds aren't trusting in the same way. So you can't just put them in the ground. Not necessarily, of course there's always exceptions, but they don't want to come up in 2 weeks exactly after you sow them with the water and light, as something I don't know, some of our vegetable seeds might want to do. So seeds are really incredible because, well, for one, it's this adaptation that plants have invested in. It's this huge energy investment to produce seeds. So it's kind of this risky thing, but the benefit is that seeds have all these adaptations that allow them to kind of sit on the landscape and not germinate when the conditions aren't going to support their growth. And so when seeds do finally germinate, what is required is that they imbibe water. They absorb all this water. So usually after some rainy season, and then their little embryonic root emerges, and then their seed leaves emerge, their cotyledons, with the optimal light and warmth, which is different from species to species. And then their true leaves emerge. You go to the next one. And so that's what seed needs to germinate. But when you're looking at a seed, you have a seed in your hand, what you're actually seeing, you're not seeing that little, that diagram with the whole seed cut open. What you're seeing is the outside, or seed coat. And this is kind of the first layer of dormancy that a lot of seeds have. Some seeds are just thin and papery. They might have much of a seed coat at all, water readily, but a lot of seeds have a coat that prevents imbibition. And so it kind of does all of the protective things that our coats would do in the winter time. So protection against parasites, protection against mechanical injury. It can buffer against too high or low temperatures. And so then it keeps the seed from imbibing until the time is right, which is often after enough time has passed to kind of like wear the seed coat down. And so what would happen if a seed coat failed in the fall, maybe when it was right before a freeze, and the seed germinates, and then a hard freeze comes along for a plant that maybe isn't like adapted or ready to handle that kind of low temperature, the seed would die. So you can see that's just a very basic like type of physical dormancy that helps protect the seed from germinating when it will not survive. And so if moisture imbibition, like imbibing or like absorbing of water, is one of the absolute necessary things for starting seed germination, you can kind of get an idea of what is required for a seed to maintain dormancy, either with a seed coat, like a really hard seed coat, or with different type of chemical inhibitors, so different hormones that kind of protect the seed until the time is right. So they either maintain dormancy or they like activate germination. Or like morphological, like delayed embryo development is another type of like dormancy that kind of protects the seed from being able to do all the necessary things for germination. And so for maintaining dormancy, the seed maybe needs a waterproof coat. It needs to have limited oxygen or chemical inhibitors. And then for germination to occur, of course, those things must be canceled out. So the coat must be able to break down, for oxygen needs to be available, water needs to be able to be absorbed, and then the chemical inhibitors need to be kind of like rinsed away, or the germination activators need to be activated and the inhibitors inhibited. So yeah, just going back to it, the things that you need for seed germination are water, light, oxygen, and temperature. Those are all the kind of factors that affect germination. And so it's like, how do you know what type of dormancy your seed might have? And then how do you know what treatment to give your seeds in order to get them to germinate? It's always really tricky to know where to start, even if you know about seed dormancies and you know about seed treatments. It's like, how do you know then which one your particular seed has? And so I always think it's really important to kind of know your plant, know the type of fruit that the plant has, and know a bit about its life cycle and where it likes to grow. And that'll tell you a lot about what that seed, what kind of dormancy it might have and what it might need to germinate. So some really important questions I always ask is it a cool season or is it a warm season plant? So a cool season plant does most of its growing in the fall and winter. So it's going to have a lower optimal temperature for germination. It's going to be able to germinate at some of our cooler temperatures and survive. And then it will flower after our winter rains here in our southwest corner, where we tend to have 2 rainy seasons, ideally, if we actually get rain. So those cool season plants will flower with the winter rains at the end of spring, and then they'll go to seed kind of like May or June type of time. And then warm season plants will do most of their growing in the spring and summer, flower after the monsoon rains, and go to seed in the fall. So that's really important to know, because a lot of cool season plants that are, that if they're blooming in like May or they're blooming in April, that they've done most of their growing in the fall and winter. And so you might know that maybe they need a cool stratification, or they need this kind of temperature change to help signal that like transition from winter to spring. So that's like a really important question to ask. Looking at their fruits, do they have fleshy berries or drupes that might be tasty to a bird or wildlife? And then if that's true, then like what would happen in nature that would get their seed to germinate? Would a bird eat it and the seed would pass through a like acidic digestive tract, and that would help alter the seed to be able to germinate? And then do they become woody? Are they like a tree or shrub? And then around what elevation do they like to grow, and what habitat type? Maybe lower desert to grassland, or maybe in oak woodland. That'll tell you again about these kind of temperatures that they might.
And I talked to Perin before we were putting this together, and we were like, oh, maybe we could go through like by plant family and have the rules for the plant family. And then we just also realized as we were going through it, we were like, we've worked with over 500 different species of native plants, and there just aren't, it's not like each family has its rules. You have some general things with like, oh, things in the Fabaceae or like pea family are going to need more scarification. But when we were coming up with this section and when Perin was coming up with this, it is just like every time we work with a new species, Perin sits down, looks at the plant. We look at how closely related it is to other things we've grown, what needs to happen to get it to germinate. But like there are so many species that we're working with that we still don't have perfect germination rates for, where there's so many species of native plants where if we get like 30%, we're just like, that's amazing. We got 30% on the silk tassel, like woohoo, like that's fantastic. And then one of the biggest things we do is like reuse the soil around that plant. So as we're like thinking about this, because I just do think that this section is really important in terms of like native plant propagation and like the secrets to native plant propagation. A lot of it is like going down this list, thinking about the individual species you're working with, and then even within there's a lot of species variation depending on like where the plant grows in nature.
And it's really wonderful to think about each of these questions, like thinking about, I don't know, really like putting yourself into the body of the plant, being like, what is it experiencing before it germinates? Which I think is just a great way also of like really getting to know your plants and the places that they're growing and their like, the communities that they're growing in. Whereas like, yes, you can have a group of seeds and break them up and try all the different seed treatments. And I absolutely recommend that. But I think even before you do that, like it isn't just a crapshoot. It is kind of like the seed is interacting with its environment, which is interacting with like what type of seed, you know, it has. And so getting to know the plant really can tell you a lot about what to do. And then there are definitely patterns across some of the genera and families, but there's always exceptions. And I'll try to like put some of these groups to, you'll see the photos where I'll be like, well, a lot of Rus family plants have fleshy berries. And so they oftentimes like very similar stratification and scarification treatments. But yeah, thinking about these questions is a great place to start. So some seeds, of course, don't require any treatments. We do that all the time for seeds. We just direct sow them. And it works best if the seeds are freshly collected. I have found that we can let her out. My dog is whining, sorry everybody. I have found that when I've collected seeds and they're like clean enough, but like I haven't just totally cleaned them and stored them and just thrown them in a pot, and if they've been like pollinated well and are very viable, good seed quality, then a lot of times those will do really well. And it also works well, the direct sowing, for warm season plants, so ones that you know probably shouldn't need a cold stratification. And with seeds that are like thin or papery or delicate, so a lot of like lower elevation, asters, lots of asters, grasses, agaves, and mints that have little tiny seeds. I feel like the direct sowing is useful for a lot of those, and there's always exceptions, of course. And then regardless of other seed treatments, I like to start pretty much all of our seeds with just like an overnight soak in lukewarm water to help rinse any of the chemical inhibitors, and also just to give them like a jump start on imbibing water. I also have oak on this slide, which is an awesome one. It's a great example of like recalcitrant seeds, so seeds that don't store well. They like, we don't really have any oaks in our like seed storage. We mostly just collect them, do a float test to get rid of ones that are like totally undeveloped. And then we like to leave them in a bucket with water and like mulch. It gets like stinky and kind of like, you just think of kind of like the composted forest material, and they will like germinate in the bucket and then you can transplant them. But that's another one that's like almost like direct sowing with just a simple soak.
Also, I guess, was it the blue oak species? I don't know, always species that we try. And for the blue oak species, we did the float test, and it was something like 7 months they were not germinating. And the day I was about to toss them and was just kind of depressed and thinking like, well, maybe a bird came in and ate them. Who knows? I'll like look around. I started seeing the little germination, little babies coming up. And that kind of stuff is so exciting, where when we were talking to some of our oak people about it, it's like, oh, holy moly, like blue oaks aren't supposed to really have need like a cold stratification, but they obviously really did, where they like came up after this cold strat. So it's so fun. And then you like write it down, and, you know, keep notes on it so that you don't throw them out next time. But there's so much of that, of just like figuring out, but yeah, it was like 7 months.
Yeah,
it was something ridiculous where we were ready to give up.
So now for different types of seed treatments, the one I'll start with is cold and warm stratification, which breaks a physiological dormancy. So basically it's simulating a seed change with temperature. So some seeds might need like a consistent period of temperatures under a certain, you know, certain degree. And then the shift into like the warm temperature is what like triggers the hormones to change to stimulate germination or to break dormancy. And cold stratification is just like, we usually take little baggies, you put moist soil media in the baggies, like fairly saturated, but not like soupy, not like a bag of water. And then we just put our seeds in there, write it down just so you don't forget what it is in the fridge. And also I like to write when it should come out. So we usually do 30 days, 60 days, sometimes 90 days, which is like a really long cold stratification. But generally the 30 days is like where we start. Yeah, and then we don't do warm stratification that frequently, and that's something that I'd like to learn more about for certain species that like when we have asked for, like we haven't been able to get it to grow. Something like that's interesting is seeds that have like a morphological dormancy. So their embryo, when they fall off of the mother plant, their embryos aren't fully developed. So they need this like after ripening period, and that's what the warm stratification can help do. But also oftentimes for plants like that, people just say to use old seed, which is always like, what? Like you have to wait 5 years and then you have this like bag of old seed and throw it in a pot. But that's been something that's, we haven't run into so frequently, but I know of some species that are like strangely weedy and like you'd think they'd be really easy to grow. People have said you just use old seed, like Atriplex canescens, the like 4-wing saltbush. That's one that people have told us, and that's probably like a warm stratification thing. But usually, especially with our temperatures being like warm anyways, it feels a little silly to do like a warm strat when the nursery, you know, during the warm season's already like, you know, whatever, 80, 90 degrees every day. So we do a lot of cold stratification, especially here at our like mid elevation in Patagonia. And we can go to the next one. So different types of cold stratification plants, or like ones that like a cold strat, are for seeds that are from woody plants, oftentimes that like to grow at mid to high elevations. So you can think of ones that are experiencing freezing temperatures more frequently, or for seeds that are from cool season plants and that bloom in the spring. So on the right-hand side, I have a few of those, like the top two on the right are the Mariposa Lily, the Calochortus Kenya, with like a spring ephemeral, like it just pops up after the winter rains, doesn't last very long and disappears, even though it's like perennial, it just grows from this little underground root that just hangs out and you never see it. That's one that loves a cold stratification. The Delphinium, the larkspur right next to that one, also kind of like a spring ephemeral plant, blooming kind of early spring. And then the two underneath that, a lot of our penstemons love a cold stratification. We do it for pretty much all of our penstemons. Because the ones down there are Penstemon barbatus, the beard tongue, and Perry's penstemon, Penstemon perryi. And Perry's, I would say, is like the earliest spring bloomer of our different penstemons. And barbatus can have a longer blooming period, but it usually starts like May, June. So it still tends to like, and just thinking about where it growing slightly higher elevation, like, you know, start to see it like around Molino Basin, maybe in Tucson. They just like that strat. On the left, you have Fallujah Paradoxa and what am I? Persia stansburiana, the cliff rose and the plume. Those are both family. I feel like a lot of the woody elevation, mid elevation rose family plants love cold stratifications. Yeah. So those are, and then I said on the bottom, you can't really see it, but a lot of tree species, especially like all of your mid to high elevation tree species, like thinking woody plants, love cold stratification. So then another type of treatment is a hot water soak. and this is a scarification. So hot water, it like helps wash away, again, germination inhibiting hormones, although we do pretty much for any treatment, we'll do like a warm water soak, but when you do like boiling water in a kettle and then pour it over, it's a little bit more extreme. And it helps really hard seeds imbibe water. So it helps the water like get through that seed coat. And then on the left, we have this mechanical scarification. So for seeds, this seed is Erythrina flabelliformis, the coral bean, super toxic, really like rock hard, large red seed. And it is so hard. And that's one that we tried all different scarification methods. So other ones that you can use are like a little scalpel and slicing into the seed, or like some snips where you want to cut off a corner just till you see that white, like in that bottom photo, but without really like damaging the embryo. You don't want to like cut the seed in half. Or sandpaper can work for seeds that might need like a gentler scarification or just a little bit of a breaking down of the seed coat. This seed though, we tried all of those, nothing would work. And finally we started using this mechanical tool. This is a bench grinder where we're actually like slicing into the seed pretty deep. And then after that, we poured boiling water on top of them and let them soak for 24 hours. And then we sow them and they actually like swell up. You can see them imbibe. And then when we sow them now, they like come up really well. Like we have really great germination rates for that one. So you can go to the next one. So yeah, these are some of the different plants, some examples of plants that have really hard seed coats that prevent imbibition and that we do some kind of physical scarification to the seed. So this is a one where that is like fairly common across the family, where pretty much all Fabaceae or bean family plants have fairly hard seeds, especially all of the ones that are like grow in true pods. So not all bean families have those like hard pods with hard seeds in them, but pretty much across the board, any of the bean families with hard seeds and pods, they like a scarification. So you have Senna hirsuta, Mesquite there on the bottom left, and then the coral bean on the right. And then here's just an example of scarifying the mesquite bean seeds. I think this is actually the honey mesquite that we did for Phoenix area.
This is the Vellatina actually.
Oh, okay.
This is one though that we had been asked to do a grow out, and we collected some of our own seed, and we collect really nice seed. So we collected all this beautiful seed and had to boil it, like put boiling water on it so many times. I didn't realize how much scarification it needed. And then for another grow out we had to do, we didn't have time to collect seed. So I ordered some from someone, and the seeds came and I was like, oh, these seeds look horrible. They have all these, they're all really buggy. They have little holes in them. I'm like, oh, I don't know if these will make it. And we poured like hot water on them and they all germinated. It was like 100% germination. I was like, oh, that's super interesting. Where the mesquites really do like a scarification and like the hot water slash like even bug damage, which is really interesting. I hadn't realized that about mesquites.
And it's cool in this picture on the right, the one in the pot, you can kind of see after the boiling that like outer layer opening up on some of the seeds. And so that's something that the boiling water can help do, is like that seed coat, the water needs to get in like in there, under there for the seed to imbibe. And like Francesca said, sometimes we do boiling water once, sometimes you do it like 5 times when the seeds are like very hard.
To soften the seeds.
And then these are just a couple, I didn't know these were after, sorry. So this is another scarification. This is sandpaper, similar type of thing that's happening. You're breaking down the seed coat. You can imagine like a plant in the wild that has really hard seeds, like what kind of process this kind of scarification is mimicking, where a mother plant doesn't necessarily want to drop all of its seeds right around her base and have these babies all and resources, even though I hate the whole phrase, the idea of competing for resources. Anyway, this is mimicking the really long process. You know, it can happen over 5 years that it takes for the seeds to be like washed down that rocky slope, going into an arroyo and getting tumbled around and like rubbed down by the rocks and like slowly wearing down that seed coat until, and then also like being in like a little crevice where there's enough water to imbibe. And so this is kind of mimicking that and try and like speeding it up a bit. Again, a scalpel or garden snips. Again, the bench grinder. So, and then you have seeds carried in fleshy fruits like drupes or berries. I love these. These are some of my favorites. You can imagine that these fruits, like just looking at them, they look tasty, they look delicious. A lot of times they are tasty, not always, but for us too. So you can imagine that like something is gonna come along and eat that. Birds might come along, it's gonna fly over to the next plant, poop those seeds out. They're gonna go through this super acidic digestive tract. Or the fruits are gonna like fall to the ground and just like, you know, rot and ferment in their sugary, delicious juices. So this is kind of like seeing these berries, seeing these like sweet, fleshy berries, you can totally get an idea of, okay, this is gonna want some kind of like pH change, some kind of like acid scarification or some kind of fermentation. But like the key to these is that fleshy berry type. And so what you have here is there's a Lysium. So like a lot of plants, if anybody gardens, you know, like what you do with seeds even. So a lot of plants in that tomato, potato family, the Solanaceae, like that Lysium, have this type of, or like this type of seed treatment. On the bottom, you have the Saltis reticulata, the hairy. We have the rhuses, a lot of different rhus species like this. And then you have the prunus, the like chokecherry up on the top left. And then in the middle, you have Sapindus, the like soapberry, and which is another common genus for like liking these type of, or having these type of fruits. And so, yeah, one of my favorite ones is for doing fermentations for seed treatment. So you know, when there's like a lactic acid scarification that happens when you're doing fermentation. So what we do is we like mash up the seeds in water. So they're like this soupy, gross soup. And we just like leave them in that bath for like oftentimes a week or 2 weeks, and they get disgusting and stinky. You can see like some of the mold growing on top of these. Or if we have clean, dried, like stored seeds, we'll put them in water and mix some sugar in with it and let that sit, and that has a similar effect. And yeah, so that's what that's doing is like a pH change is another thing that affects the shape of proteins, which is really cool. And so and all hormones and enzymes that like regulate growth are proteins. And so they can be activated or deactivated with that change of shape. And so that's what changing the pH does, is it changes the shape to either turn off germination inhibitors or to like turn on and like activate the germination stimulating hormones. And then the other thing that we do that's like a similar thing is the acid scarification. And we've done some with just with sulfuric acid. The easy at-home way is citrus juice, just like lemon juice and water, which has worked really well. And it also does, you know, a similar thing with mimicking digestive tract. It can also be helpful for some papery seeds, kind of like the softer version of the mesquite. You saw that little like outside coat that needed to just open up enough to like let the water in. So this is one, the Eisenhardia orthocarpa, the like kidney wood, which is an amazing, cool plant that has that kind of like cinnalone thorn scrub type of feel to it. And it's like in the Fabaceae, but it has these kind of like papery seeds. And that was one, we couldn't figure out how to germinate it. It felt too extreme putting it in boiling water, and we tried that. I talked to Jack Dash from Desert Survivors, who's an amazing botanist and horticulturist. And he was like, oh, you should try putting some lemon juice on it. And we tried that, and it works so well for that seed. It also is great for chiltepine seeds. We recently germinated some of those, and we happened to have like tacos with some limes. And we're like, we should try the taco limes. So we just like threw them in a cup and squeezed a little bit of these like tiny little limes on them. And those ones are like some of the best, like they were some of the most successful chiltepine seeds that we had grown.
Putting it in lemon juice or bowl.
Lemon juice is another great way to like do the scarification.
That's crazy.
And then a lot of seeds require a combination of treatments to germinate. So think back to that berry slide that I had with all those fleshy fruits that like oftentimes an acid scarification or a fermentation. Almost all of the species on that slide, they're all like woody tree species that are also like mid to higher elevation. And almost all of those, we do a fermentation followed by a cold stratification. So a lot of times you need to like thinking about the fruit. What type of fruit? Is it a fleshy berry, but is it also woody and likes higher elevation? And so maybe you want to do both of those. And so that's with seeds that have like multiple layers of dormancies, because they're brilliant and can protect themselves in multiple different ways from germinating when conditions aren't going to support them. And so just to kind of like tie this up, it's really great to, if you have a seed collection that's all kind of from similar seed quality, it's been stored in the same way, it's been pollinated in the same way. It's great to break it up if you have enough in a couple different groups and try one with like direct sowing without any treatment, and then try another one with maybe cold stratification if it's woody or higher elevation or spring blooming, and then try one with maybe a combination of treatments. And then you can always compare the groups, like which one germinates better. And you just got to keep trying stuff, and again, write it down so you remember. And yeah, and it's easy and it's fun, and you will get things to germinate. And then, yeah, so what we do with like writing it down is, like Francesca mentioned earlier, this is the collection form. This was supposed to be the propagation form. There we go. Yeah, it's just writing it down. This isn't actually this like screenshot isn't the greatest example, because in the seed propagation section, that's where we would like write in the seed treatment start date and end date and kind of how many seeds we started with and what we did. There we'd write like 2-week fermentation followed by 30-day cold stratification. But yeah, it's very useful to write it down. And yeah, and then I guess the last thing is, like Francesca mentioned earlier, don't expect to get 100% germination. Like, don't be defeated if you feel like you got, 50%. So like knowing what to expect is really useful, because also know that oftentimes when plants are dropping their seeds, not all of those seeds are going to germinate. They generally produce more seeds than they expect to have babies that germinate and mature into adult plants. And so like a really successful seed germination can be like, yes, sometimes we might get like way more than we expected, like 100%. But oftentimes it's like, if you can get 25% and above, it's actually really, that's pretty successful. And so just knowing to not be defeated with lower germination rates. And then also the complex, brilliant, mysterious ways of seeds is something to have a lot of reverence for, and also something to also not be defeated by. That a lot of times you will try all the different things and it will be very confusing. Like sometimes you'll have seeds that will respond well to to 2 different treatments, and then you'll try those same again the next year and they won't work at all. Or sometimes you'll be like, you'll try all these different treatments and still the seeds will want to sit in those pots, and like they will still outsmart you and be like, I'm going to still wait 6 months and then germinate. And then other things that always affect seed germination is like seeds maybe aren't always pollinated or fertilized super well, and that can be due to all different types of factors. The seed quality has a huge effect, so sometimes like really bug-eaten seeds might not do well. That's not always the case. We've had buggy seed lots that do great, but seed quality really affects germination rate. And then of course, like Francesca mentioned, even with like soil nutrients and drainage and water quality and mineral content. So we have really hard water at our nursery, and like certain species are like way more sensitive to that. And then of course we have soil that's like more sterile for a nursery environment to prevent, because we don't want to be hosting pathogens. And so like maybe some seeds really need the like mycorrhizae to germinate. So there are all kinds of other factors that affect seed germination, but generally you can have great success with trying all these different things at home, and you will get stuff to germinate. Just don't be defeated. Put that defeat into reverence and like, these seeds are amazing, and keep trying. Yeah, so I think that's all I have for seed germination.
And yeah, something I want to add to the seed germination, the fact that everyone who is here is probably really excited and believes in their ability to get some seeds to germinate. We have so many tours and so many classes of people that come by and like really have some serious emotional trauma from propagation or even just killing their plants. And that's something we just always talk to people about, is like, it's okay to kill some of the plants. We kill plants accidentally all the time. That's of course not the goal. But it's not like, you know, you're raising a bunch of puppies. You don't have to like be, you know, be as traumatized from accidentally maybe forgetting to water one day and having something that doesn't make it. Like, we're all just learning, and the plants want to be propagated and they will forgive you in the larger scheme of things. And for so long, I really was just like, what is up with people's strange defensiveness about being horrible with plants? And then I realized, like, oh my gosh, people are just really traumatized, and that's actually really sweet. So yeah, encourage your friends to have at it. If you have a friend or someone that's like, I don't have a green thumb, I can't do it, I'm not good with plants. As humans, we're all good with plants. And I mean, we love this because I'll be working with plants until the day I die. And even then, I'm not going to figure out all the secrets. And so often they just do weird things, especially the wild stuff where, you know, you're not just experimenting with domesticated crops, you're doing like stuff with really neat, wild pollinated things, which, yeah, as Perin said, makes it a really mysterious, beautiful, beautiful thing. And so with that, we're at 10:12. I want to give people like a 5-minute break that was recommended to us by someone that was enjoyed the few-minute break. We're gonna go through some of what?
I just realized it's 10:19.
It is 10:19. We're big sneaky. But I'm gonna go through. I saw all these awesome comments that I couldn't see before when the screen was shared. So I'm gonna go through these really quickly. Which is yay for all the rain comments, and yay for rain in Sonoyta. We're like watching. We went outside and saw the dark clouds approaching, which is super exciting. Carla, the recording will probably be on, we'll download it and put it on our YouTube channel too. So it will be like available to go back to. We are in Patagonia, Arizona, which is the Sky Island region. We're about 11 miles as the crow flies from the border, just northeast of Nogales, like 20 minutes, 20 minutes. The place in Oregon, that's the seed storage facility, is in Bend, Oregon, right?
Yes, I'm trying to think of what the name. I'm not sure actually what the name is. It might just be like the National Seed Lab or something like that. I can't remember though.
And there's a few national seed storage facilities throughout the United States. The one for the West is in Oregon. And this year, for example, with our massive seed collection effort for the Forest Service, we usually clean our own seeds, and this go around we're sending them all unclean. So we're shipping like 400 pounds of seed to Oregon. And then they'll clean it in their facilities with, they're really big. How does the box with newspaper work with the deep root containers? The box, so we use the box, it's just like super low tech. We're really into low tech solutions for propagation. So previously we had the picture of the wooden box and we put newspaper in. The newspaper eventually decomposes and the roots just hold the soil together, but there's little spaces in the box so that water can go through. We don't keep them in there super long. A great example of how I've used the box before is someone gave me a ton of sycamore seeds, and we hadn't grown sycamore, and I didn't expect them to do very well. And we filled the box with sycamore seeds and all of them germinated. And so then you go through and like transplant out the little babies. But I love using like either the 1 gallon size pot or boxes to start things that we're not sure about how they'll germinate, like what the rates will be. Because in our nursery, it saves so much space. Instead of putting like 1 seed per cell, we just, we propagate hundreds of thousands of plants, and we just wouldn't have any space if we put 1 seed per cell.
Per pot.
Per pot, yeah. So it really helps with like a space consideration thing.
And as far as root depth, once they're little seedlings with true leaves and roots that are like reaching the bottom of the tray, we would transplant them out into a larger pot. So it's like just for seedlings.
And then we have the question about the soil mix that, thank you, Elena, for writing it in there. It is equal parts perlite, cinder sand, cocoa chip, and compost. A lot of people love using peat moss, which works so well and is wonderful to propagate in. But we also like to think about like where the peat, peat is non-renewable and is like just we're destroying all these peat bugs. Plants do love it. It absorbs water so well. The coconut coir is sustainable in that it's a readily available product, that there's a lot of waste from industry all over the place, but it is also shipped in from a ways away. The other thing you have to think about with cocoa chip is that it can be very hydrophobic. So we have automatic irrigation and we do water things every single day. So I don't worry about the hydrophobia so much. Let's see, what are some other comments before we get back into it? Let's see, recommendations for small scale greenhouse. So we're about to get into we're going to talk about cuttings first before we talk about greenhouses and greenhouse construction. We have a ton of resources that we will email to everyone that includes like small greenhouses that I think are wonderful to use. A lot of people like to put greenhouses together with like PVC. We've done that before and they just kind of fall apart. So often they are cheaper materials, but for at least the structure of what you're building, it's nice to have something, either steel or like hardcore aluminum, just something a little sturdier. But we will email out our list of resources.
Seed extractory.
Oh yeah, nice. Seed extractory. And then how long for acid treatment for boiling? Is it just a quick dip? So for the boiling water, when we do describe it, people often think that we're taking seeds, putting it in a pot and like boiling the seeds. But it's kind of the opposite, where you have seeds in a glass jar, you boil the water, you pour the water on top, and then wait at least 24 hours. And that's where you're looking for that seed to imbibe. So that's also where you like can take a look at the seeds, and if they look like they've swollen up, that generally means like your job there is done. Sometimes you then have to like repeat the process a few times, or consider at that point like the manual scarification. For the acid treatment, how long did
it depends. Like we've done the little sulfuric acid, and I can't remember like what molarity our sulfuric acid solution is. I think it's like 6 molar or something like that. And that's kind of hard to come by, so I like doubt there's that many people who will be doing that type of acid scarification. But when we did that, it would be like 5 to 10 minute amount. Whereas with lemon juice that we like squeeze into like a small bit of water to like slightly dilute it, we've done that anywhere from like a few hours to a full 24-hour period, kind of like soaking them in, because you're doing the lemon acid scarification and doing the like rinse imbibe water soak at the same time.
And actually for the chiltepine one that we just did, we actually did that with we had a little in-person class that we kept really small and with masks for COVID times. And that was when we did the like taco lime. And I totally forgot about those for a week or something, and then found them later on the shelf and was like, oh no, I should stick these in the in the pot. And those are the ones that are coming up right now. So that's also like, sometimes you figure out like, oh, actually maybe with the chiltepines, they should hang out for a week in the lime juice. I also know someone in Nogales that propagates chiltepines by feeding them to their chickens, and then digging up the chicken poop, which is, exactly what chiltepines are designed to do.
That is a fun thing too. We do propagate prunus seeds, like I said, the chokecherry, with like fermentation now, but the very first time we grew the chokecherry, somebody brought us a bear poop that like had the seedlings germinating in it, and we just like got each of the seedlings out of the bear poop and transplanted it. So you can also like not even do the simulation mimicking thing. You can do the straight up like, go scoop yourself a bear poop.
Yeah, we like sold all of those right away. We just told everyone like, this passed through a bear, this cherry tree passed through a bear, and people were so into it.
I did try that with the manzanita though, and it didn't work, where I was like out collecting bear poops. That one's really hard to grow though. It needs like smoke tree, it needs this like stacked like 5 different treatments. But
and that's something yeah, we should mention, we mostly haven't because we've been failures with it, but we've tried all these different manzanita germination treatments that aren't, I think we have one actually that I think is manzanita that I'm really excited about, but we'll let people know later how that one goes. So there's a lot of seeds that react to fire as a way to break dormancy. And what propagators had realized is they're not so much reacting to being burned or to the heat of the fire. They're often reacting to the chemical compounds in the smoke. And so there's really neat ways to do a fire treatment or like a smoke treatment. And you can even just go online and they sell these little smoke tablets that you would put in water. So you'd put the seeds in a little jar, and then you'd put the smoke tablet in there. Oftentimes those plants like will also need a cold strat in my experience. Like it's a combo, but it's certainly a really fun one to try if you're working with some of the species like Arctostaphylos, like the manzanita. And if you have any good ideas for our local manzanita here, we've had a really hard time with it. When I worked at the UC Davis Arboretum, all the Arctostaphylos we propagated was by cutting. And a few from seeds, but we weren't that successful with it even then. And then the last question I'll hit before we get into the cutting section is from Jorge. Hey, Jorge. And about coral bean, and is it too much to combine an acid treatment with a mechanical one like the sandpaper thing? And for the coral bean, I think it would be, just because I'd be worried about the coral bean, like sections of it, because it's so like, I don't know, like has so much storage material.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't want part of that to burn versus like the tiny little hard seeds. We get like 100% germination just doing the corner clipped off, like the angle grinder and hot water, maybe more hot water, but it's like all of it comes up.
Yeah, and that's one that it's like, if you don't have to do the acid, I don't know, might as well not do it. And it also makes sense even thinking about that seed where it is like a really hard one. But I feel like pretty much the seeds that we use acid scarification on are, like I said, those like really fleshy ones that are going through a gut or like are fermenting in their own juices. So you could try it and let us know, but we have not had to do any acid scarification on that one.
Yeah, when boiling water works so well. But coral bean is my favorite plant to propagate, and it's just beautiful, and it's blooming right now, and it's such a beautiful plant. So without further ado, we're going to talk about cuttings, propagation by cuttings or clonal propagation. And this is my favorite topic. I don't know why I love cutting so much, but I just feel like it's super magical when a plant can reproduce clonally, especially with the soft tissue versus like softwood cuttings versus like hardwood cuttings. I really love the clones. Also, something that's really important to think about. So we just talked for a long time about seeds, and seeds are wonderful because seeds are maximum genetic diversity. For restoration, everyone talks about genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is so important. Oh, you need genetic diversity to restore the landscape. You need genetic diversity in your food systems. Everyone loves talking about genetic diversity. But what about all the losers of the genetic diversity world? And this is something that we hadn't really thought about until we got into grape propagation, and we're propagating a lot of Vitis arizonica, the native grape, by seed. And we were lucky to have a volunteer working with us who is a grape breeder from Maine. And we had grown out like a whole tray of the Vitis arizonica And they all looked pretty healthy, but as they were germinating and growing, they had like really wonky leaves. Some of them like just grew the leaves upside down. They were not uniform at all, even like looking normal. And I asked Jerry about it, and Jerry was like, oh, well, grapes just have such incredible genetic diversity that you just really have to, like, right off the bat, cull the ones that aren't going to grow well. Like, they're just, a lot of them are going to be weirdly stunted. And so when plants are putting out seeds with genetic diversity, they're hedging their bets, and they're putting out, like, often many of these species are incredibly, have so much genetic diversity, but they're also not expecting all of those seeds to survive in nature. Some of the seeds like do really well with a lot of water. Some of them are incredibly drought tolerant, but we're not geneticists. We're not testing these genetically. Like, we don't know what the genetic markers are. We're just growing out plants for restoration. And when you think about seeds for forbs, seeds with grasses, it makes so much sense to put those seeds out there to like grow out those babies and have the maximum genetic diversity. When you get into plants like shrubs or subshrubs, that you look at the life of that plant in nature and realize that every year this plant might produce 500 to 1,000 seeds on its individual plant person. And in nature, like, how many of those even germinate that year and survive, or germinate, period? So you'll have like an Apache plume plant that maybe in that plant's entire 30-year-old life cycle maybe has 2 babies out of the tens of thousands of seeds. And those 2 babies are like perfectly selected. So the rationale with the clones is that instead of doing all this work, and this is like my, bit of like a devil's advocate with just like really promoting some clonal work with restoration, instead of doing all this work to promote seeds that maybe aren't first of all, aren't adapted to our current climates, and maybe have weird genetics that they're not supposed to survive in the wild, we put all this energy into growing them out. In some cases with shrubs, it would be so nice to do little clones and not do them all from one plant, but like find successful individuals in the landscape, take clones from those, and then at least the plants that you've propagated that are clones, you know that they have the successful genetics to survive. As plant restoration people, there's absolutely no way that we can transplant and propagate all the seeds and plants that you need to restore an area. So much of the work that we're doing depends a lot on this like fertile island hypotheses of like, if you set up one area to be really great and full of plant life, like those plants will then continue to populate themselves, is kind of the idea. So that's one reason I really like cuttings and clones, and why I think they're still important for restoration, even though genetic diversity is important. The best way to learn how to do to propagate plants from cuttings is to do it in person. So that's why we have this whole thing of like, there will be a handout attached. But even then, we encourage you to like, we will offer some class in the future where you can just kind of get used to doing this. With clonal cuttings, and this is kind of similar, it's a little different with softwood cuttings, but there's softwood and then hardwood cuttings. So softwood cuttings are like this salvia that you see in the photos, where you're depending on that plant to use some of its storage energy and some of the photosynthesizing that it does naturally to produce roots. So you prep them by, you like go through all this material, and you end up cutting the little piece that you want to propagate down to a few inches. If you do them too large or too long, it's just really hard physically for the plant to keep water in its system. So you don't want them to be too long. And then you cut off all the side leaves and a little bit of the top leaves. And then you cut the base at where you want that plant to produce roots, just under the node. And nodes are like the little joints in plants. And those nodes are often some of the only areas, it really depends on the species, but often they're the only areas where the plant is going to divide its cells. And the plant at that point has to kind of make a decision on whether, dogs, on whether they're going to produce little roots from that node or if they're going to produce leaves. And like 2% of them always produce leaves, and we laugh at them and throw them away. And then the ones that are successful and produce roots, we transplant. So we do this little prep thing where we cut off all the side leaves, we put them in a little jar of water, and then we stick them in these pots. And there are some species that absolutely do not need any kind of hormone whatsoever in order to root. Heuchera is one of them. We do this a lot with yerba mansa. You just absolutely don't need anything. The plant is just so vigorous and wants to grow. We do this with salvias. We do this with a lot of the vines. This is Lonicera arizonica. And giving them just a little bit of hormone. And usually it's like an indobuchloric acid auxin hormone that just stimulates the roots to come out of like where that little node is. And something else, there's often like in the powders that you can just buy, like the really cheap powders you can just buy at Lowe's or Home Depot or something. There's a tiny percentage of antifungal, and that is helpful for just buying the cutting a little more time so that it doesn't rot. And right now I'm excited to do a bunch of cuttings, partly because the humidity's up. We don't have a super high-tech greenhouse. So I'm just really excited to get a bunch of stuff going, because just out, like, I feel like I could put them on my porch and they would end up rooting. It's just so high humidity right now, and feels so much easier to do it than when it's so dry.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
And just, this is like the most ideal time for the cuttings. We tried so many times to do cuttings of Passiflora mexicana. And the only time we got them to survive was like the tiny window of like super monsoony, like the highest humidity of the year. It was like a couple years ago, pre-2020 drought year, or worst drought year. But yeah, if you're gonna do them, I'd recommend doing them now. And the other thing I wanted to add is for the material that you're choosing to do the cuttings from, it's ideal to not use material that's like in the process of producing seeds or about to produce flowers. You can like cut off the little flowering buds and still use that material and go for it, try it. But in general, when the plant is putting a lot of its energy into flowering or producing seeds, it's not going to be as readily put energy into root production. So ideally picking the like non-reproductive growth.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. And then these are the cuttings we have right now in our greenhouse. I dug up some of the Lonicera to show for this presentation. And just because I think it's a fun little, like the timeline of how it works. So on the left, this is what happens first is the plant at the node, it produces some like callus tissue around the bottom of the node. And then it just goes for it and produces all of these roots. And especially for plants like vines, they're just so good at propagating this way anyway. Another neat way where you could do it clonally that with a lot of vines like is you don't even really have to technically cut them off the plant. You could just layer them. So you can like send out stems or vine pieces, and you can just like dig some of the nodes into the soil nearby, and then prune them back once they root. That's like an easy and super natural way. But it's just a way to encourage these plants that are already trying to do, especially with like the vines or the ground covers, that are already trying to send out little clones and root. It's just a way to really easily get a lot more plants out of them.
Francesca, what would you say is the biggest kind of like mistake, or like when we have cuttings that we do with a big group and like they're not done totally right and they don't work? What would you say is like the biggest issue, maybe with like the node or the top leaf cutting?
Yeah, I'd say
I see that a lot.
So like on this piece on the left is a nice up close picture of what a nice little cutting should look like. And often people leave way too many leaves up top. So like, half of the plant is all leafy material because people feel so bad cutting the plant back. But that just makes the plant put so much energy into trying to keep those leaves alive when it already is just hanging on for dear life, and you're trying to stress it into producing roots. Another thing people will do is they just totally cut off the node accidentally. Like it's just hard for people to see the node and recognize it. So a lot of times I don't let the gap year volunteers do this anymore. And for, I think, I don't know if Geese is still on here, but for any of our, or Gardenia, any of our volunteers that do work at the nursery, we are about to get into cutting season where we'll be able to do some of this at the nursery. And we should maybe have some fun workshops with cuttings. I really love cuttings. It's so magical. Like digging them out when I took this photo for you guys gave me such a thrill to be like, oh my God, look at those amazing roots. And I'm still waiting on these, like this is all the same timeline. This isn't like the same plant. I mean, I guess actually technically it is the same plant because they're all clones of each other, but these were all in the same pot. So this one on the left, I believe will root. It just needs some more time. So I'm giving it some more time before I transplant them all. We do this, we also do it with like roses, super fun to do cuttings of. We do like a heritage rose thing from the gardens in Patagonia, the old library and stuff. And then the hardwood cuttings, we started doing these more and more recently, but like grape works really well. This is the ribes, which is so easy to grow from hardwood cuttings. And this is like a different idea than the softwood because you're not depending on the plant to photosynthesize at all. You're taking dormant sticks of plants that still have life in them. So you want to use like 2-year-old growth is a nice time, like age to use. And then you cut the sticks also at the node, but it doesn't matter as much with these guys. And then you just stick them, like in the winter, we just stick them in the greenhouse and then keep them kind of moist, like you would with any other stuff you're growing. And then the plant wakes up. And when the plant is waking up, it's not on the tree anymore or like the main parent, but it just like, most of them just think like, oh, the ones that are with sunlight should start growing leaves and the ones underground should put out roots. And it's just such an easy way to get material. And then they already like grow roots and they're, 1.5 feet tall or something. So it just saves you all this time. And for species like the ribes, like a lot of riparian shrubs and trees grow so well from just hardwood cuttings. What failed? What were our big failures?
Manzanita didn't do so well, but I think that's just also, it needs maybe stronger rooting hormone or maybe more humidity. We did in the past, we did a lot of dormant grape cuttings specifically for the female grapes because we were trying to get more that would actually produce fruit. And for the first year that we did it, they didn't do so well. This last year, though, I think we got a bunch of grapes. So that's like a great one to do when they're dormant.
The Celtis, did we try Celtis that failed? The hackberry?
Maybe. Oh,
there were a few species
we tried
that didn't.
Soapberry. I don't know if those didn't work, but.
The Sapindus, we've had a hard time with the soapberry. We love that plant. And actually recently we did really well with seeds. Perin's like cracked
fermentation.
Perin's cracked the seed code on that one. So, but it's one that will send up like rhizominous, clones from the root system. Suckers, you think it'd do better from clonals, but it's happy with the seed. So that's good enough for us. Transplanting, well, leaf cuttings, 10, 11, 12. Okay, we're gonna hit like transplanting. We'll breeze through the nursery specifics, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions or for people to bail if you want to bail. So for transplanting, we always have this as like a section of the classes we do in person, just because it's fun to get people to transplant things. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward to transplant. Basically, make sure that they have enough roots. Go back to this one. Make sure that they have enough roots. Put them in the ground, put them in the media. Keep them moist. I think the biggest mistake with this one is that people transplant seedlings all the time and then don't water them in well enough, or they leave them drying. Especially in the West, like things dry out really quickly. So the plants just really need moisture, especially when they're trying to establish. We transplant things even when they're incredibly tiny. This is a bunch of yucca seedlings we're transplanting that did really well. They all did great, but as soon as things have true leaves, generally are good to transplant. When they have very weak little root systems, just be really careful that you don't break off the root systems. But that would be, I don't know, the main things. give the plant some water. These are baby agaves. Agaves, we grow out thousands. We have like 10,000 agave babies at the nursery right now. They're so cute. And we transplant these all the time. So this is 3 plants. This isn't one plant growing. These are 3 plants in one little cell up on the top left here. And you can see their cute little seed hats on the top. They like lifted up their little seeds and then grew these funny little storage cotyledons. And then from the base of this is where they'll grow their true leaves, and then eventually will look like these plants in the bottom. These we transplant really soon, where like even as soon as they just have the barely emerging true leaf and they just have one tiny little root sticking down, that's early enough for us to move them around and put them each in one cell, so they don't crowd too much. Also with agaves, like they don't need that much water, but again, they can dry out if you're not watering them. People think because native plants are, native and adapted to the area that they can go through anything, but they really can't, and they need all the help they can get. This is an older slide, but to touch base on some of the projects, we already talked about the chiltepin propagation. The Heuchera on the right is a really fun one, because we really just divide them like in half, and don't use any kind of hormone on them. We did get good seed germination. Like that was nice we got a few hundred from seed, and then those individuals we then kind of divide. And so it keeps genetic diversity up, but you're also using clones from those individuals, but they're all like unique individuals. So you feel like it doesn't hurt the stock as much. And they're super beautiful, but are just like easy plants to grow. Okay, nursery management. And it's about to rain, which is really exciting.
Yeah, we're getting thunder here.
We get thunder in the background. So here's a little shot of our native plant nursery in Patagonia. We were originally funded by some BLM funding and some Forest Service funding. And then through our, which was like part of the National Seed Strategy, encouraging little native plant material stuff. Nurseries can get super expensive. Each structure can be really, really expensive, especially for commercial grow outs, where you can end up spending like hundreds of thousands of dollars per structure. Since this picture was taken, we've added a few structures, but we love our method, and like I feel like our success with our native plant program is we never spent that much money on the structures, and if anything, just made sure that we had people to work. We've had so many structures donated to us from the federal agencies and like especially the Park Service, partly because the one thing with nurseries, and probably the most important thing with nurseries, is that someone has to be there every single day. And you might think like, oh, you just have to be there absolutely every single day. We even had this like huge screw up this winter because we don't heat our structures. We put on the structures holding in enough heat during the day. We like close all the windows and all the doors because it gets warm here during the day, even in the dead of winter. We close the doors at like 3:30 or 4 p.m. And then outside the nursery, it'll be like outside the structure, this nursery gets like 15, 16 degree lows regularly because it's all this cold air coming off Mount Wrightson that settles. But inside the structure, if it's that cold outside, it'll be like 28 degrees. So it's still under freezing, but often the native plants don't even go dormant at that temperature. Well, we had like a miscommunication screw up from a couple of our very sweet and wonderful high school student employees, and someone didn't close like any of the doors, and it was devastating. It like probably ended up killing at least 1,000 plants, and then setting stuff and like baby things, and then setting a lot of things back time-wise where they went dormant and then took a lot longer to like for them to get going again into the season. And it was just one of those things where you're like, this is this devastating loss, while also being really kind to the high school students, where you're like, people, I could have made that mistake. It's totally possible, you just can't be there all the time. So we've always tried to invest more in like having people be around and be paid to take care of the space than like really fancy setups. There's so many wonderful native plant nurseries that we want to give shout outs to. And if any of you are interested in starting a native plant nursery, we really encourage you to, partly because so many people don't know what native plants are or why they're important, and I think they will soon, and then there will just be like more and more demand and interest. Even in our town of like 600 people, people often just think we're growing weed in the little valley there and don't know what native plants are. And so like we just talk to people nonstop about native plants, and so do all these people here. So I just think wherever you are, like if you're interested in starting something up, we want to support you, and we've supported so many native plant programs in Mexico and like all over the place. The Gila River Indian community has come to us, and we've like helped set up just like, here's what to do with basic nursery stuff. We just are really supportive. Yeah. And and all of these folks are also really nice too. We've had wonderful interactions. If there's a nursery person that doesn't want to help you, it's often not because they don't want to, it's because they're so busy and stressed just trying to remember to water their plants every day. So don't take it personally. But we always want to help people. So we highly encourage. Oh my God, it's raining.
Ooh, it's pouring.
Integrated pest management is the very first thing I want to talk about with nurseries, partly because this year we got nailed, and we never have had cats before at the nursery. I felt guilty. Oh yeah, thank you. I felt guilty about cats just because cats are monsters, and when you let them out, they do kill so many wonderful, important things. With this drought that we experienced, so much of the problem with the drought, we have a good well, so it's not like we missed watering plants. We had a pack rat invasion, and we already hang all of our germinating tasty seedlings. We hang them all in the structures because we realize that the mice can't get to them. The birds will sometimes get in and eat at them a bit, but so far, that hasn't been a problem. Like setting traps even doesn't really fix anything. When you're a nursery and you're watering stuff in dry seasons, little like mice and rodents and squirrels and pack rats come out of the woodwork and eat all of your hard work. This year we got a couple cats. They're the loves of my life, and they not only like took care of the rodent thing. They kill like one animal a day, sometimes more. They also, because we don't have as big of a rodent issue, like the rodents know that there are cats now, and there's just less of them. We then didn't have a very big rattlesnake problem. Last year when we did this class via Zoom, we were at the nursery because we wanted to do some like in-person demos in front of the camera. And while we were out there, a rattlesnake showed up, and we like had to be like, we're showing everyone the rattlesnake. We usually have like 8 snakes a year at the nursery. Yeah, people have seen them on the tree when they're walking, but they haven't seen them. We haven't seen one at the nursery. And I do think that the cats have helped a lot. So I'm now a big proponent. And then like all my nursery friends are like, yeah, you need cats at the nursery. They're very helpful. So I want to do a shout out for that, because even if you're a cat hater, and I understand why you would be, the rodent thing, I just have a serious problem with rodents. They're the absolute worst. So this is getting into our structure, how we do our structure setup. Here are things you need to think about, regardless of how big or small your nursery is, like your little greenhouse is. You need a frame for the structure. We then in Patagonia, and really, I think this is important in general in the West, shade cloth is so much more important than the plastic. Even at our nursery where it gets really, really cold, you can end up heating or covering the little babies that you're trying to get to germinate and protect them from the cold. Most of the bigger things we have will just go dormant in the pots and won't totally won't totally die in the pots. They'll just go dormant. But people often totally underestimate how much shade they'll need and how important that is. And it saves you water. It's good for the plant. Also, when you're propagating anything, you have to think about that of how they're actually propagated in nature, where often even little succulents or plants that once they're adults love full sun, when they're germinating absolutely do not like full sun. And so it's really important to make sure that you have shade cloth. For our structures, all of our bigger plants that are already hardier, we put under 20% shade cloth. And everything that we're propagating from seed or cuttings, we use 50% shade cloth, and then have areas that are even darker, like especially for cuttings where the stuff will burn or dry out really quickly. Then once you have the shade cloth, you should think about putting plastic on. We don't spend money in the summers to cool our structures. We just take the plastic off. So our first base is shade cloth. Then we put plastic over that November through April, or like till the middle or beginning of April. And then that's just like the cycle. And I know that it can't, you know, people are like, well, who's gonna take the plastic on and off? Even before we had Travis working for us, we would just like hire some people to help who are comfortable on ladders. If you're not comfortable on a ladder, don't do it yourself. Ladders are very scary. I won't get on a ladder, but I'll hold ladders for other people. So be really careful with ladders, but I'm just a huge fan. Like right now at our nursery, we only have one structure that has, no, two structures. All right, two of the structures have plastic. Everything else is getting watered right now by rainwater. So that's like a big thing for us to think about with the summer monsoons, is that this week, like with how much rain I see happening right now, all of our container plants are gonna just double in size. They love the rainwater. It makes such an incredible difference. And then you wanna think about a weed barrier because you don't wanna spend all your time pulling weeds, and often throughout the year, you have a structure going.
Okay, baby. I'll be back.
You'll want to like redo that weed barrier because you're, you know, growing things in like a warm or shady structure with irrigation. Of course, plants are going to grow from the ground. We're very selective with how we weed things in the greenhouse, and actually use a lot of the plants that do just grow as weeds. Like we have clematis that we don't get rid of completely just because we dig it up and stick it in a pot and sell it. The same with all our milkweed, like a lot of our Arizona milkweeds, the Asclepias angustifolia. It reseeds all over the nursery, and Perin collects seed off of it. And we just dig them up as little individuals and transplant them. So your whole like greenhouse setup can be its own propagation thing, and just see what wants to grow in it. But you also don't want like Bermuda grass getting in there. You don't want nasty invasives. You don't want all the dangerous stuff that, you don't want a big pile of Johnson grass somewhere. And then irrigation is really important. We do overhead irrigation that are all on timers, little timers. A lot of them are manual timers, but you can still set them for like an hour or two. And then we still have to go in and hand water. If you had all the time in the world, all the volunteers, I would end hand watering everything, just because it's so much more efficient than like overhead. Overhead is just convenient. For our bigger pots that we have trees in, we have the individual emitters that go into each tree pot, and that's more efficient. But irrigation is really important. And I wish that nurseries could be more sustainable in general, but they're not that sustainable. You're still like using groundwater. Anytime you're using groundwater, it's just not that sustainable. But you're growing plants and putting them out into the landscape. And then the last thing to think about is benches. And this is so that you don't kill your back. If you have big things, you can put them on the ground or like straight on the weed cloth. Everything else in trays or 1 gallons or 3-inch pots, you want to have it like a nice waist level.
And it's also important to keep plants out of standing water. So benches help not having them like sitting in a pool of water where that can kind of host pathogens that you don't want to be putting out into the landscape. So having them off the ground and also on a table that's like, we use wooden pallets a lot, but you can also do the corrugated steel tables, which are really nice.
Expanded steel.
Yeah. And they have a way for the water to go through and still fall at the bottom, so there's not any stagnant sitting water.
yeah, if I could, I would get rid of all the pallets and just use expanded metal or expanded steel tables. They're just $56 a piece for like a 4x8 panel. And we can't afford it. But, and the pallets are free. We just like drive around the area and, you know, pick up pallets all the time. Cinder blocks are the best. Cinder blocks and pallets are the way to go. Just so cheap. Oh yeah, we send out budgets because that's one of the biggest things other native plant nurseries have asked us is like, okay, all right, how much did you write into the grant? How much should I budget for, you know, wanting this size of a structure? And so we have like for our standard, oh, how big are they? How big are the shade houses? 50 by 50 by like 25 maybe?
So, yeah, something like that.
This structure is the sexiest structure that we have. And this is because it's like all really fancy, hardcore painted steel that's even all rusty. It looks all vintage. But this was given to us by the Desert Botanical Garden. They got a $2 million grant for their propagation facilities. That's so wonderful. And got these huge, beautiful state-of-the-art greenhouses. And then picked a few nonprofit nurseries to drop their old structures off at. We got one of them and we're immediately like, oh my God, this needs like a $50,000 cement footer, like base for it. We can't afford that. So Travis, bless his heart, put it together, like put it all out on the ground, and then realized like, oh, if we make it a little bit shorter and a little narrower, we can actually make it so much wider. So he put all these support things in the middle. They used to be on the original structure. They were holding it up on the side. And this is our retail greenhouse now. It's a little fancier than this. It looks like this. And we have our like middle bench where we have stuff at a nice height that's easy to get to. And then this stuff on the ground. We actually just recently put all of these pallets up on cinder blocks, like the 1 block high, because this just became like a pack rat hotel where the pack rats were just living under all the pallets, and they were taking pieces of cholla and just had these like extensive breeding facilities inside the greenhouse. So we took all the pallets, we put them up just 1 rung, and now we're pack rat free. It's been quite the process. We do get snow once a year, and other nurseries and greenhouses, like because it's so rare in Arizona, people don't think about it, but some of our neighbors' little greenhouses collapsed because they were just enjoying the snow day, and we're lovingly neurotic about our plants and like ran out for our snow day to hang out at the nursery and took all the snow off, and we didn't lose anything, which was wonderful. And then when you're building, this is super important. It doesn't matter so much if you're never putting plastic on, like if you just kind of stop production in the winter, but we produce through the winter in our little valley, and we have the plastic on the top of the structure, and we have doors really nice and tight. We then also have these little breezeway windows like this one on the left in Baby Hubert, and some of them, they have like little pulleys, so we're able to like pull up the breezeway, just so that instead of putting fans everywhere, if you just have nice enough breezeways, the air circulates just fine. If you want to throw in a fan, it always makes things a little better, but for the most part, it works just great throughout the winter. And then closing everything up before it starts freezing again. We have one structure that has a little fan, but we don't have like the swamp cooler wall thing. We've tried different heating methods, and we tried the very first year we operated, we tried this like electric fan. I don't even know why they sell these things. The electricity bill was so expensive. We like only used it for a month and then never used it again. So if anyone wants this thing, this is probably, I think we spent like quite a bit of money on it, but you need like a big 220 outlet, and it works pretty well, but it's electric. The way to go is to use these gas heaters if you're going to. We have one at the nursery that Native Seed Search had set up probably 20 years ago, and then never really used, but one of our structures has lines to it. I might one day try and get it running. I mostly though we can't really afford it at this point, and I'm happy with how things, like the timeline we have for things growing, seems to work great. Here's different kinds of irrigation boxes you can use. This is like a classic one. This one works so well, and you can set it to go off multiple times a day. We recently got some cheaper ones for Baby Hubert, our little propagation greenhouse, that are just battery powered and very simple to set up. But there's only a few options where it can either go off like once a day, 5 times a day, or like every 2 hours. It does something like that, which is fine for our needs. And then you set how long it goes off for. This is really nice. I'd say the biggest thing that screws people over and nurseries over with these is that you get comfortable. So you know that, oh, I don't have to worry about that greenhouse. It's gonna water all weekend. And sometimes it doesn't, and then you lose all of your plants, which is unfortunate. So just be really careful when you have things that are automatic with how dependent you become on them, instead of just like actually looking and checking on your plants every single day. Here's our irrigation budget, and we'll also include this, but per structure, we usually include about $1,000 worth of irrigation infrastructure for these structures that we're putting together. And then there's different types of emitters. So I mentioned that ideally all plants would love to be watered by hand with like a hose and a nozzle, just because you're making sure you're hitting all the plants and getting them as much water as you need. For these emitters that work so well, we use 2 different kinds at the nursery, and we use one that has bigger droplets. So when it's going and like irrigating an area, the droplets that are hitting the plant kind of slide down the leaf and like get to the soil. The water actually makes it into the plant. We have another type that are foggers, and those are wonderful for like seed propagation, cuttings propagation. It makes a super big difference. Here's that expanded metal, the like steel tables I was talking about. Oh, I love these, and most of the ones we have just been found. We've never bought them new, but maybe I should do something where like once a year we buy like 4 or something, and then over time we'd have the whole nursery with these. They never break down. They're wonderful. I wish our whole nursery was full of these, and they're beautiful. They're just beautiful. I love them. This is what it looks like the rest of the time. This is the rest of our nursery. It's just these pallets. They always disintegrate. We have to replace them. We have bonfires with the old pallets every year. Yeah, you just do need to replace them, but you can generally find pallets that are free. This is our soil bin situation, and I was so proud of Travis when he built this, because at the Arboretum, we had these all over the place, and it just makes a huge, at the UC Davis Arboretum where I was, it makes a huge difference for the volunteers. And when we first started the tree, we had like tails, compost, and a shovel and a wheelbarrow, and the volunteers had to go and count how many shovelfuls they were putting in the wheelbarrow, and then mix it in and do that all. And like by the time they actually got to transplanting, they were exhausted. And by the time we actually got to transplanting, we were exhausted. So now we have these nifty boxes that fit about 20 yards of soil, and you take the top off, we put it all in with like a tractor, and then are able to just work out of this for a long time. And you add water as you pull the soil out of the bench. It's really good for your back. If you're thinking of putting together a larger nursery or like a program or something like that, I just highly recommend investing in this. It makes such a huge difference, and you don't kill your body. So this is what it looks like in the shade. Throughout the summer and spring, our volunteers and staff work under the shade, and then in the winter, they like to warm up in the sun. If you're in like a lower area, we're at about 4,000 feet. So if you're in a lower area, you probably never want to stand directly in the sun. Some people do, but yeah. Then in the winters, we'll also, when it's really, really cold, we stick the volunteers, go back to the wheelbarrow method and stick them in. But at that point, everything's growing pretty slowly, and it's okay for people to like work slower. This is something that people have been asking a lot about, what we use for fertilizers. For many, many years, we never used fertilizer at all. We just used the compost that came in our soil mix. And I've been so happy with that over time. This year, we've been under a lot of pressure to fund our program and grow plants a little faster. And after the great grat fiasco of 2020, we lost a lot of agaves to the pack rats that then we had to like restart agaves and get them going. And we talked to a lot of other nurseries that said like, you should, you know, definitely consider putting fertilizer on. So we use organic fertilizers. We have a liquid one. This one on the right, we're using a ton of. These ones on the left, we added to like the oaks needed a lot of fertilizer to get them past this little stunty area. They are important. You can totally grow plants with just some compost, and especially native plants. Often, most of them just are fine. And then when it rains on them, they do really, really well. I'd say overall, it would be more important to probably have like either use rainwater on your plants or have a fancy reverse osmosis machine than add any fertilizer ever. Probably watering is more important. This is just like an important, it doesn't look like this anymore. These are photos we took of just like what happens at a nursery where people donate a bunch of pots and then you have a big pile of pots, or someone thinks it's a great idea to make your own compost and then no one manages the compost pile and it just turns into rat habitat. So we learned a lot during the great pack rat fiasco and we've totally cleaned everything up. Let me see if I added a slide of it cleaned. Of course I didn't. This is all organized where it's on pallets, on like cinder blocks and pallets, which also is really helpful for the snake situation. We made a lot of changes this last year, like over, you know, just hanging out at the nursery during COVID quarantine of like cleaning all of this up. And it's something that happens everywhere. It's so easy to, you know, not clean up piles, but piles are more than just ugly. They're like straight up dangerous. They harbor pests and they often can harbor things like snakes. So just throwing that out there. We will also send along an oak document with different oak species. I feel like we're kind of running out of time and I want to make sure that we get to the questions, but we will send in the follow-up email for everyone that signed up. We'll send out our oak documents, and this has what species grow in this area and what we've learned propagation wise. It's really easy to germinate oaks, and then it gets tricky after that. So we're actually, our next big investment is going to be a reverse osmosis machine to like clean and purify the water for our propagation section, our propagation area. There's just a few things that I worry that have never done super well that I'm like, this would make a big difference. But most things, everything has just been like really, really low tech that we've used. Just like little carts, hard wheels. Otherwise they all go flat, like those types of things. So we have a lot of goat heads all over the nursery there. What else? Oh yeah, the very last thing, I think this is the end.
Can I make a comment real quick about structures?
Definitely.
Oh, I just wanted to add, oh, sorry, I just wanted to add, did you talk about heat mats, baby Hubert?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Oh, I was looking at all the like heating, cooling methods that we've talked about as options, and just want to touch on like we do a lot of like DIY lower budget for our like size and for our like capacity level. But if you're like doing a smaller capacity, like not as many like grants and contracts kind of thing, you're growing a little bit more like for home, or you're not starting a nursery facility. I would say that also for heating, like we do the plastic on and off, like Francesca said, which is great for like most of the plants. As soon as they're transplanted into a bigger size, they're hardy enough. And even though it's like below freezing, it's not a hard freeze. But we do have one structure for our seedlings that we keep heat mats in. And that's like the cheapest way to add just a tiny bit of additional heat that goes directly under the pots with, you know, to like warm the soil, which is more important than warm air. So I definitely suggest that. And then also, you can, like, there's so many options. I want to point out that there are so many options of like different levels of like types of structures that you can put together. And if you are doing something at home, like Francesca said, some of the most important things are just like putting your plants on tables that can drain out and get them off the ground and keep them so that like rodents aren't getting into them. And then having like a little cover of shade, whatever, and you can like build something really easily with just a little shade cloth over the top. And then when it's cold, you can even have like some rime or a blanket or like a piece of plastic, especially for Tucson, where you're not getting as many hard freezes as we are, that you can just throw over like just the plants, like just the table, versus having a large structure that you're covering. So there are like, I think that the examples we've shown are like, you can have something really fancy that's way above what we do, or like we're kind of like this mid-level, but then you can also totally do things like at like a home garden yard scale with just like a table and a little ramada. And heat mats if you want for the winter. Heat mats are a little piece of plastic.
The heat mats are so important. We use them all. The only time we don't really is in the summer, but partly like our nursery's in a real cold sink, so our nights are always really cold. But it'll regularly be pretty cold in the baby Hubert where we germinate our stuff. And what the seed is reacting to is the temperature of the soil. So that is so important. The very last thing before we get to questions that I want to bring up is for anyone interested in like timing your growing, your grow outs. The main way that nurseries, especially for restoration or like any contract for a grow out, if you're wholesale or having to grow out a ton of different plants for a project, it's so classic that a biologist or a restoration practitioner will come to you and be like, hey, we need like 1,500 cottonwood trees this summer. Can you get that to us? And it's like, absolutely not. Like, there's absolutely no way that's gonna happen. And this little chart we put together, mostly when we were presenting at different restoration conferences and talking to partners of ours, mostly like, because, you know, we really support seed collection, like regional seed collection. And once you add in the seed collection component, it adds like at least a year. And then you need to add in, depending on the size of what you're growing out, at least another year. And then like the situation with our baby agaves, where like sometimes, you know, stuff happens. So you really like have to plan it for these larger scale projects. And every funders and everyone just wants to like get stuff in the ground and walk away. But ideally, like if we had a restoration project at Wildlife Corridor, and we're really lucky that our partners own that land, where we look at these revegetation projects for like, these are decade-long projects where you'll have to monitor for a long time. Like, you know, you first do the seed collection, you come up with your species list, then you do the seed collection, then you decide what's going to be applied seed and what's going to be propagated. And then once you propagate it and you plant it out eventually, and then you go back on it and maybe have to replant. Like, it is this like really long scale thing that might be obvious to everyone, but it's kind of comical how many really like nature and like biologically savvy people just kind of forget, because, you know, we're all working off funding deadlines and fiscal years and forget how long some of these things take. But with that said, I recommend every single person to propagate all your own native plants. And if you want to, you should all start your own nurseries, and we'll help you. And we also invite you to like come visit. We're going to be closed for the next couple of weeks, mostly to like write a bunch of grants and do a lot of reporting. But we'll be getting ready for our monsoon plant sale. And come email us and come visit. Do you have something to add before we break for questions?
No, let's do questions and read the chat box too.
Sweet.
Thanks, everybody.
And for questions, we'll go through the chat box first, but then people, you can either like write into the chat box or just feel comfortable like raising your hand, and you know, you can unmute yourself and you can ask a question. So let's see.
Ooh, there's a lot.
I know.
I have a question. I'm just unmuting myself if that's okay.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Sorry, this is Elena Ortiz.
Hi, Elena.
Hi. I'm curious about. So I've got this whole system set up that miss my seeds, and I feel like I'm watering it too much. So I'm trying to find out about how often you guys missed your seeds.
We missed, right now we have ours go out 4 times a day, and it goes up early in the morning, once in the like midday, once in the afternoon, and once at night. And and we just set that up very recently. Before that, we would, mostly just when we were there, we'd like go in and turn it on for, I don't know, like up to an hour maybe. If you're, why are you worried that you're overwatering?
Just I don't want them damping off, or I haven't seen that yet, but I just got started, so I'm trying to make sure that.
What for native stuff, I think one of the best things you can do, that's like a soil thing, where if you have really well draining soil,
Okay.
you just like don't really have to worry about that, unless it's also an area that doesn't get enough ventilation.
Okay.
So if like cuttings, for example, really want the high humidity, a lot of times the seeds would prefer like frequent and constant mist. But if it's just too muggy in there, then they will like dampen off and get kind of gross and have a problem.
Okay.
Do you want to add?
No, that's great.
Would you also recommend propagation via cuttings for things that take a long time to maturity when grown from a seed? Yes, absolutely. Often though, if they are super slow growing plants, they're not going to be easy to take cuttings of. A great example though are things like cottonwoods are the famous cuttings example, where there are areas all over the place, but especially like all along the Rio Sonora, where they're propagating via cuttings like 25-foot tall pole cuttings. So you're like burying them like almost half in the ground, and then you basically just have like a massive tree over a month, like rooted into the ground, which is so cool. It's the really cool like riparian species, but yeah, it like the cuttings speed up the process. So even like that's why so many salvias people just take little cuttings of, and within a few months you have a plant that otherwise takes like maybe almost a year to get to that point via seedling. Do you use the same soil recipe for cuttings? Oh my God, that's such a good, I didn't talk about it. We don't. You can use soil for cuttings. The problem with using compost in cuttings is that for the most part, since you're taking a raw piece of vegetation, you don't want it to get diseased and you don't want it to rot. And so you're often using sterile media. So there's many different types of media that you can use and you can root into. Sterile sand, like even just going to like Home Depot and getting a thing of sand. You can root in sand. You just wouldn't want to reuse that often. We do a 50% light mix, which is like Home Depot or order them, or they're just like they come in the bags. And that's nice because it allows plenty of aeration while also holding moisture in. You could do peat. You can you do a lot of different media. It just would be better if it's sterile media. It'll mean that you don't have to deal with as many diseases. How long do you keep them in water before putting them in the soil? I think Blanca is gone, but you would keep the cuttings in water just like while you're processing them. So I don't know, if it takes you all day, they'd be there all day. If you need to wait, if you don't have time to stick them that day, you put them in the fridge in the water and then stick them in the media. Palo verde. Palo verde, because it's in the Fabaceae family, it's like in the pea family, is very, very hard to do cuttings of, but are easy to grow by seed. So those are plants that would need a scarification to grow, and they're, I feel like the fabs are pretty fast growing. I did a really cool tour of Savano growers, which is like, the large, like their wholesale area. And they do cuttings of mesquite. They have like this really cool cloned mesquite that they actually get to root. But they just have like these massive fog houses. And in the fog that they put out is antifungal, like an antimicrobial. which is pretty wild. And then it takes them a while, but they will root. We just don't have anything that fancy. And when you can grow them by seed, like it's so much easier. Maybe they have cool varieties of palo verde that they'd want to clone for some reason. Have you had luck rooting cottonwood? Yes, cottonwood does root. We actually failed. We had some pole cuttings that we killed over the winter this last year, but we all make mistakes. It's okay. I think they just dried out and got too cold and didn't do it. But you would want to harvest the hardwood stuff in the winter. So the idea with hardwood, and even with like the cottonwood cuttings, is that you would take like pretty long, you can take pretty big pieces and then keep them really, really moist, and then they will grow roots. The same with like willows, all that riparian stuff grows roots, which is really nice. So I love the comments. Thank you guys. Do you have any tips for transplanting things that don't like being watered insignificantly when getting established, like different soil suggestions?
I'm trying to think of what would not like to be watered in getting us, because I feel like even some of the driest, arid land plants need the have the transplant shock reduced with water. But
yeah,
yeah,
I don't have, I'm curious, maybe are you talking about cactus, Riley? Are you talking about what do you mean?
I did mean cactus. Sorry, I should have specified. I also used to live in a climate that was really damp, so high atmospheric humidity. So I was just wondering, I've had issues with even aloes, which are usually pretty hard to kill. So just wanted to ask your input.
Totally. No, that's a great tip, and that's a great thing that Riley's bringing up in general, where if you're dealing with cactus and a lot of baby succulents from seed, honestly, that's where the peat moss stresses me out a bit, and is one reason I'm kind of afraid of peat moss. It's kind of unsustainable, but also it just holds moisture so well. And because we use our mix for everything, we use it for our agaves, we use the same mix for everything, mostly out of being cheap, not out of it's the best mix. It just works for us. But we have not had, we water everything, mostly because when we're propagating, it's so dry. And when we start propagating, we live in a really dry climate, but especially for cactus, a heavy sand. I really like the cinder sand, honestly. I'd never really heard of it before, but you can look it up. It's a black, larger particle sand, which means there's a lot of really good aeration. But I think with the size of the particle, it also means that the root zone doesn't dry out as much. The air doesn't go away as much. I don't know if that makes sense. But I'm really, really sand mix. And I think Riley brought up a great point where be really cognizant of what your humidity levels are like and what species you're working with. I mean, there are some species that you shouldn't really water very much at all. If you're trying to grow Ocotillo or, all kinds of stuff, that any Heuchera that doesn't want very much water, it'll just root out.
And that can be super tricky, I know, with having all of your seedlings in one structure, where most of our stuff wants maybe a little more humidity, but then you have some stuff that's damping off because you have one structure with the heat mats for all the seedlings, and you're trying to, especially where we are, where we're kind of at this mid elevation, so we're trying to grow some stuff from the lower desert and then some stuff up to 9,000 feet. So we're trying to be suited, provide an environment that is suitable for a pretty big range of plants. So it can be really tricky.
And I would say that's one of the things I love about native plant nurseries, and with our work, where 90% of the plants we're growing are plants that are found in our watershed, and we have really cool plant diversity, so we get to work with really cool plants. But it also means that you can be pretty forgiving, and for the most part, stuff does similar things. If we were at a botanical garden spot where you would then want a really fancy greenhouse with section, your desert section and your orchid section, which is so cool. but also like not super feasible. We're not going to become a botanical garden ever. We're going to like just grow the native stuff. And if you're collecting stuff in your region, for the most part, it also like makes it easier to grow those things because it's used to your environment a little bit. Do you have a problem with coyotes and cats? That's why I never get any cats. I don't even think Brianna's here anymore. Her name isn't Blue anymore on here, but I used to have a slide in here about our sheep and goats because they like would eat all the weeds down around the nursery. And this year a mountain lion killed all of them. Oh, hey Brianna. A mountain lion killed all of them. We have like such nasty predators in Patagonia. I mean, like wonderful, beautiful, magical, incredible nature predators. But for like anything domestic, you have to worry about your little dogs and your cats.
Especially in drought years. They're hungry and coming into the towns and riparian areas.
We have like 5 mountain lions in town right now and 1 bear. It's really intense. And when I got Sam and Alba, that's the name of the cats, Sam disappeared for 10 days. And I was like, Sam is dead. Like we lost Sam. We have a big fence around the nursery, but they're stupid cats and they will go on little walks. But there's so many coyotes around. There's so many mountain lions around. Most cats that wander just disappear. Sam was gone for 10 days and I thought he was dead. And on Facebook, someone 3 miles away had shared a post being like, is this anyone's cat? And he was gone for 10 days before he showed up at this person's house. And I went and got him and brought him home to the nursery. And he's never gone anywhere since then. So it's like we scared him into sticking around the nursery. And there's plenty of rats to eat at the nursery. There's no reason for them to go anywhere else. But that was like a big highlight of this last year, that Sam didn't die. Sam and Alba are doing great. They're so cute. They're really sweet. Most of the native plant nurseries in my area in the Mojave in California have desert plants from Arizona, and so far I have not yet found any folks doing native seed exchange programs in my region. Mojave Desert Land Trust does have a nursery sale 2 times a year and herbarium for Mojave specific plants, and sometimes Colorado too. That's awesome. We love the Mojave Desert Land Trust. We feel like there's so many cool things happening in the West. Arizona does have, like, compared to most areas except like suburban parts of California I've been, Southern Arizona has a lot of nurseries and like native nurseries, which is so cool. I think Tucson people are just like into native plants. Let us know if you're like anywhere else. I mean, if you're anywhere, even if you're in Patagonia or you're in Tucson or you're in the Mojave region, if you're interested in any seeds, especially if it's like for any kind of grow out or program like that, let us know. We have the stuff that we have on our website that's for sale, but Perin has all kinds of cool things in the bank that we'd love to do like an exchange with. We've had some of our plant nerd friends come and bring us seeds that we've grown out for fun. I'm also so into seed exchange, partly because the reason I think we don't deal with many disease issues at our nursery is because we don't buy liners from other nurseries. So especially being like a chemical free or like, I don't know, we're not certified organic, but we don't use pesticides or synthetic fertilizers. And we propagate all our stuff from seed, which means the only disease issues we've ever had come into the nursery, like ever, have been from salvaged things. And I love salvaging plants because I think it's so important when you have plants that are otherwise going to be murdered for development or mining or whatever. There's been some beautiful plants that we brought into the nursery, and those are the only times we've had disease issues. And it's just like, if something's diseased, you have to destroy it. Or if you like really know your chemicals and your pesticides and have a whole area where you can spray things and be safe about it and you know what you're doing, like, I'm supportive of that. But for the most part, if there's plants that are diseased, we have to get rid of them. There should be more nurseries in the Mojave too. That would be awesome. Also, if you know of any cool nurseries we should talk to or check out or go see, like, let us know, because we do love nursery folks, and if anything, just need to find time to get away and talk to them. Have you ever used any water catchment systems for rainwater for irrigation systems? We haven't, only because we need so much water every day, and we've done the math. And in the rainy season, we take the plastic off the greenhouses because we want that water to hit the plants. So things are getting watered by rain then. And then the only structure we have that has a roof, we did the math on like, even in a really good rain year, how much water we'd get. And it's like not even enough to water the nursery for like a month. Nurseries just need a lot of water. But I love that idea. And those oaks I was telling you about, this like sweet man grew like 10 oaks over years, and he used only rainwater, and they were beautiful, and was then able to donate them to this really cool restoration project. I like really love that. The only reason we don't is because we use so much water, it's like not quite worth it. Can you give some recommendations on what to look for when looking for land or property for a potential nursery? If I had to do it over again, we love that we rent from the Native Seed Search Farm. We rent the top 5 acres of the Native Seed Search Farm, but it is so cold because it's this little valley at night. And it's not even like it makes the temperatures during the day cooler. It's still hot in the daytime and then really cold at night. And the best thing you could do, and it depends where you are, but if you have like cold sinks, most of the West, I guess, like, you know how when you're camping and it's colder, you don't want to sleep in the bottom of the little valley because that's where the cold air sinks, and you want to be like up a little bit so that the cold air doesn't settle there. The only thing for a nursery for Southern Arizona is like, don't put it in a little valley. Do you have any other good ideas?
I mean, I guess it's like, you want to be sure that you have access to water, enough water. And I guess this isn't property characteristics before setting up a nursery. It's more like if you're going to set up a nursery and like orienting your structures, being really aware of like where the winds are coming from, and kind of like the orientation in relationship to the sun between, you know, the winter and the summer, and kind of like thinking about that when you're arranging your structures.
Yeah. And you can do it like, you can think about the orientation both ways. So if you like orient them north and south with like the doors facing north and south, you'll have like more daytime from like the east to west sun moving over the structure. But we're in, you know, that's also like makes sense for people in Canada or in really cold areas where you want like maximum sun exposure. And we've had a lot of success with some of the greenhouses we oriented the other way, and then actually put like a darker like end shade cloth. And so like the sun comes up and then sets the other on the door sides, and they just don't get as much sun, which is kind of nice, honestly.
We definitely do have issues with, I don't even think this is something we could avoid in our area because we just have such intense winds. But I guess because we are in like a really open like floodplain ag land, we get like pretty intense winds, and we pretty much like once a year it's usually right as winter's ending going into spring, we'll have one of the structures like the plastic will rip off. Still, usually we have enough on the plastic to be able to just like shift it over so we can keep reusing the plastic from year to year, but we still will have to like replace them every couple years. And it's not such a big deal because it's still so much cheaper and like makes so much more sense to have the removable plastic versus like the hard plastic structures. But that's just something else, I guess, to consider.
And then how often are you watering seed trays or those waters with fog mist emitters? We do both. So we do the mist emitters for our seed trays. They get watered every day. But then we also like once a day go through with the hose and get them, you know, water them in. Any pots that you're growing stuff in, one of the best way, like it's so interesting to me that we have people that come water either to volunteer or like start working or like student employees and like don't know how to water plants, which always is surprising, but it is kind of counterintuitive. We're like, if you put the water on something, you're like, oh, the plant's getting water, and then you go to the next plant. But probably the best way to think about root development and the plant in the pot, whether it's a little seedling or a bigger plant, is like you put the water on, and whether it's overhead irrigation automatic emitters or it's with a hose, you want the water to go through the whole horizon of the pot. Because if you only have the mist hitting the very top of the plant, soil horizon in the pot, the roots aren't going to go down. So that's actually something that like, it's really easy to see a plant that's alive and be like, oh, it's doing great. And then you look at the roots, and we actually screwed up with some currant that we just had in the corner of a greenhouse where it got a little bit of mist and we didn't water it enough. It was in like 5-gallon pots. We didn't water it enough with the overhead, the hose. And then they looked huge and beautiful. And then someone was like, oh, can I use these for a project? And we're like, yeah, sure. And they were like, dude, there's only like 4 inches. So it's like all the roots were all at the surface. The plant was fine. It's, you know, a riparian plant, but it's really embarrassing. And often for other plants, like the goal for so much restoration is to have the roots really well developed all through the pot. There are fog emitters, mist emitters, and it's like also considered a mist emitter, but like just a larger droplet. You would be looking for droplet size with the different emitters. And did that photo mention that fertilizer is good for killing mites? In the fertilizer photo, there was one miticide, like organic miticide, that was in the pile. I actually haven't used it yet, and I bought it a long time ago. Mostly because I still just murder things that have mite issues or change the watering regime. But like pest stuff like that, I like take out of the structure, is my favorite way to deal with pests. Bye, Blanca. What are your thoughts on those propagation balls? I think that's what they're called. Basically, you choose a branch on a bush, strip away the top layer of a T-inch area all the way around the branch, and attach this propagation ball with soil, peat, moss, and 2 weeks later, cut off the branch and the ball is full of roots. That's awesome. I don't know, that sounds great to me. We don't use that, but that would probably be really good for like fruit trees and stuff. That sounds really cool. I don't know anything about the propagation balls. I think it'd also be so funny and like for restoration to put them on native stuff in the wild. That'd probably be kind of funny. But I like that idea, Gardenia. That's awesome.
I think it's called air layering. I've seen it done at the Desert Botanical Garden.
That's awesome.
I don't know which plants they do it, and you have to do it during like monsoon season, like during high moisture, because they dry out really fast.
Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah, we've never
water them, mist them pretty often for them to like stay moist.
But you're doing it like on the tree.
You're doing it on the tree. Yeah.
Super interesting.
Love that. I love that. That sounds awesome. What is the most difficult plant you have had trouble cracking the code for? Oh, definitely at this point, the manzanita. I just want, that plant is so beautiful and it's everywhere, and our nursery sucks because it's so cold. And I'm like, maybe if we grew some of the species that would be really hard to grow in Tucson, it would like make it worth having a cold nursery.
I do think that's one also that's like, it produces a lot of seeds. Is survivable. I went out this year because I like love flowers, and I got one of those little like up close lens for your phones that for taking like photos of plants or like mushrooms or whatever, like really close up. And I was taking pictures of the manzanita flowers, and all of them had the nectar robber bees, the like little tiny ones that drill a hole in the flower and like basically eat all the reproductive parts. I don't think they produce good seeds then, or don't get pollinated well. And so I think that's like very common around here. And so I have a feeling a lot of it is also related to like seed quality. But obviously like people grow manzanitas, and I've spoken with a couple different like nursery colleagues in the area, like Steve from GWP or Gila Watershed Partnership, and he said similar things. He's like, try a whole bunch of stuff. So we tried this year like a ton of different stuff, and I think it is tricky with the seeds, but generally so far we've had like one come up, and it was some combination of like soaking and then cold stratification and then smoking and then like re-soaking and then sowing. So it was this like whole layer of stuff. So we haven't totally cracked that one yet. And I would say it's the most difficult also because that seems to be the general consensus for like other producers in the area.
But I see it available in nurseries, but I'm thinking mostly of like the California species, the Arctostaphylos species. If anyone has good manzanita anything, There's also a tree guy in Southern Arizona, the Oaks of the Southwest or Oaks of the West guy that I really need to talk to. And like he comes up, lately he's been coming up once a week because we're trying to do all this oak work. And, you know, I love like finding people that have been, you know, that don't network a ton because they're busy being plant nerds, but have like all this amazing, you know, information on propagation stuff. So if we figure anything out, we'll talk about it in the next class. And if you guys find anything, let us know. Seed balls. What's the seed ball recipe?
What soil mixture did you use? Well, we don't put soil in our seed balls. We do seeds, clay, diatomaceous earth, and compost, or like composted mulch. And the ratio, there's like a bunch of different recipes and ratios that you can use. I know farmers that dig up their clay from their land, like a little small amount, and do seed balls by hand just with seeds and clay. We like the diatomaceous earth because it adds like a little bit of extra deterrence for like predators, because so many of your seeds will just get carried off if they're naked. And then the mulch and compost adds like a nice nutrient rich, like nice soil media for those seeds to germinate in once the seed ball has dissolved. And our ratio, we try to get it so like the seed balls should have, I mean, depending on the size of the seed and like what species mix is in there, it's like you really want, I don't know, 10 seeds per seed ball. So we do them pretty like marble sized if we can. And oftentimes there's probably more than 10 seeds. And we do 1 part seed to 5 parts clay to 1 part mulch and 1 part DE. And there's some variations on that recipe. That one is mostly based with a little bit of variation, but mostly based on at least Scornish's recipe, which I believe it's like 1 part seed to 5 part binder, which so you can like have clay, but then can throw in other stuff. And she has some really great resources that came out of the U of A Cooperative Extension. If you go to our website, borderlandsplants.org, we have a little resources page, and there's a couple of documents that came out of her lab that are all about seed balls.
Yeah, seed balls are wonderful, and the pelletization for them is becoming more and more popular with federal agencies, and the idea is that like you're covering the seed in a media that then even if it's like not the best time to sow, you can still put seed out. So it's becoming more and more popular, but we recommend, yeah, check out that resource page. From Gisa, what do you think about solar panels or solid panels for a greenhouse? Oh, what do you think about solid panels for a greenhouse? I think that is awesome and great for the wind. The biggest thing you'd want to make sure of if you're doing solid panel greenhouse is that you have plenty of ventilation, and you just have like little windows all over the place to make sure it can ventilate. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. And especially for smaller ones, they last a long time. They're, yeah, I think that's wonderful. We just love getting the rain on the plants. I think that is really nice. Do you have any thoughts on using rock tumblers to scarify seed?
I've had somebody ask me this, like, I feel like every time people are like, you should try the rock tumblers. And I still haven't tried it.
It's probably Amy at every presentation.
Yeah, maybe that's
trying to get you to do it.
I totally want to get one of those. I think that'd be really fun. Fun thing to try. I can't remember if I've spoken to any other growers who have used it. I don't think I have, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. I just think so far the like scarification that we do either with sandpaper or snips or with the mechanical tools and boiling water has worked really well. So yeah, but I can see it would be nice to just throw some seeds in the tumbler for a day or two and kind of forget about them, and then they're like also imbibing at the same time. So yeah, I haven't tried it, but I love the idea.
We should try it. We'll be on it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about the audio cutting out for the cuttings media. We use 50% perlite and 50% vermiculite. And if you're not familiar with it, it's it's sterile media that you can buy at most garden supply stores or online. You can get a big order of them. And perlite is like basically exploded sand particles that are very, they just like help with aeration a lot. And then vermiculite, it's like it holds the moisture. It's like the shiny little pieces that you see, but that like holds a lot more moisture. And the only thing I'd say, vermiculite's pretty safe. Perlite is like everyone uses it. It's wonderful. Just water it down before you actually physically use it, because it has all these dust particles that really screwed with horticulture people's lungs before they knew what was going on, and people had really horrible lung issues because it's like very small particles that you breathe in and then like are big enough actually that get like stuck in your chest. So wear a mask slash like water it down when you work with it. Otherwise it's not like toxic. It's just like very odd shaped particle size. So the whole time I've worked in nurseries, everyone always brings that up to be really careful with the perlite.
It is nice for it being really lightweight too. We used to use a lot of sand, like our mix was like 50% sand, which is awesome, but it would, when you're like moving gallon pots, especially like the bigger stuff around all day, it would just get really heavy. And it also like starts to compact more. So that's the other nice thing with perlite is it's like great drainage, but also super lightweight.
From Charlie, pots that air prune, how do they work? No bottom. Basically, that's how it works. So for like either whether if they're little cells, like the 67 Heuchera trays that we use, they just have a hole in the bottom, like one hole in the bottom. And so it's still a small enough hole where, because it's a little like plug tray, it fits. It actually is like the perfect size for a Sharpie to go in, which is really cool. But the roots go out the bottom, and then when they hit the air, they stop growing. They don't like turn around and go back in. And the same with the 4x10 tray. So those are bigger pots, and they have pretty much an empty bottom except for a little X on the bottom, and then you put newspaper. By the time the roots hit the newspaper is kind of decomposed, and so the roots hold the soil together, and the roots just see the bottom. They like hit the air at the bottom of the pot and just kind of stop and hang out.
And if you don't let the soil like completely dry out, the soil doesn't fall out the bottom. If you like pick up a pot and all the soil falls out, it's probably like not getting watered deeply enough too.
Cynthia asks about growing oak cuttings. I have failed many times. Oak cuttings we don't actually do at our nursery, partly because we're not fancy enough. When I worked at the UC Davis Arboretum, we did oak trials for oak propagation with cuttings specifically. And interestingly enough, older trees were the least successful, even if they had nice newer growth. So the most successful recipe for clonally propagating oaks was softwood cuttings from trees that were in like 15-gallon pots. So like maybe a younger, like 15 or 20-foot tree would be good to find pieces from. And then we used 5,000, I think the most successful was 5,000 parts per million indobuchloric acid alcohol hormone mix, the IBA mix at like 5,000. I don't know if that's helpful. We don't do them at all because it's like we don't have a very expensive propagation. Those also would probably really need reverse osmosis, like all those propagation facilities. University had like fancy. Matt's gone, but he gave us a list of nurseries to check out, which we're going to write down. I'm going to screenshot, which is Plants for the Southwest. We need to go visit them. B&B Cactus and Box Nursery. Not all native, but incredible nurseries and great people. Super helpful. We need to do a field trip and see everyone. Do you have recommendations of where to buy native seeds, including tree seeds?
From us, of course. I'm sure there's all kinds of other, I don't know about the other nurseries that we like listed up on the slide, if they have seeds. We do offer seeds for sale that we ship on our online store at borderlandsplants.org. It's like kind of a limited selection. You can always email us though if you have like a specific tree seed that you don't see on there, because we might have it. We don't list everything. If they're smaller collections, a lot of times we won't put them in packets, but feel free to reach out. Can you think of anybody else that sells native tree seeds or others?
Not locally, but no, I don't.
We do love this is more like grassland specific, but a lot of people come to us looking for bulk seeds that we don't really offer bulk seeds at wholesale prices just because we haven't reached a capacity where we have an excess amount of seeds that we can offer at like affordable prices because it's so expensive to collect them. but we do have somebody that does like mechanic collection out here, who's really awesome and has like he does like beautiful native grassland mixes. He also does like curated mixes that he gets from other producers, and it's Jim Coeek of Arizona Revegetation. So I check out that, but that's like fairly grassland
And
specific.
that's azreveg.com, azreveg.com. And yeah, we love his seeds and we work with him. Also, yeah, and you can email us if there are things that we don't have for sale that you want some of to try. We also recommend like doing some seed collection. You can do some seed collection on your own. We're very careful and have permits for every single thing we collect, partly because we're audited all the time and get grants, and we're not going to go out and just like grab random seeds. We're going to like know where they came from and make sure we had permits for them. But you know, if you want to like try some oaks or something, like just go look for them. Or if you're wondering about timing, let us know. Most riparian stuff is pretty like on the clock with producing seeds. Yeah. Have you experimented with using trays and watering from below? That's such a great idea. We haven't. It would probably save a lot of water. The things I would worry about are like having gross water go from area to area. But overall, it's shown for like more bigger greenhouses and bigger nursery production. It does save a lot of water, and I think can be done well. I just have zero experience with doing that and wouldn't even really know how to set it up well.
I tried it we have a little like germination chamber that's a revamped like commercial freezer thing that we've set up with like fan and a misting system, and it has heat mats and like grow lights for like winter time for starting stuff, just giving it a little extra heat to get started. And I tried watering below from there and it still wasn't quite enough. I think I did it for cuttings in particular, but a friend of ours who lives here and has a really amazing little flower farm that you should totally check out if you love cut flowers. It's called Patagonia Flower Farm. She does some cuttings propagation, and of course they're like cultivated, gorgeous, like cut flower bouquet varieties. So they also just are going to act a little different. But she has a little chamber that she does tray watering with also for cuttings, and it's worked really well for those species. But so far, I haven't tried it a whole ton, but I tried it with some cuttings and they died, not necessarily because of the watering, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm curious about it. We should try it more.
What kind of printer do you use for the plant tags? Ah, getting so nerdy. I love it. I'll send out we have a very like old standalone printer that I love. So it has like its own little keyboard for it. And I order the tags from this guy in Ohio that you have to call personally. Everyone's dropping off the call at this point.
They're like, that's enough.
But I love it. And you like type in, you just have it formatted, and I just love it because you can set someone up doing that and it doesn't connect to the computer or anything. It's just like a standalone. I'll send it. I think it's like label. It's so old school, but I really love, like, it's very dear to my heart. A rat has even like full on keys on it, and it's so solid. I think it's technically owned by the BLM, maybe, actually. I think they might have bought it for us through a grant. But you can like buy them, label store, I don't know, something like that. We'll send it out when we send resources. What database software do you use for your propagation forms? Are you able to print labels from that info that you enter on the forms? We have no. So our database is on a FileMaker database that we put together when we had first started the program. Ideally, we'd love to be able to work with either SciNet, like southwestbiodiversity.org, or like use the Native Plant Network database a little more and have a portal that we can access for our stuff. But I just wish there was a lot more public propagation info. I think that would be so, so cool. We just do the tags separately, where we like print batches at a time, and then the database is totally separate. And then we have like a point of sale system with an inventory that connects to the website and like what we have available and how much it costs. So it's, I don't know, it's a little, all of that is a little bit complicated, but it's really hard to integrate all of those things, we've realized. So we're happy with the software for our website. We're really happy with the standalone label maker. And using the online database is so time consuming, but it's super worth it. And I have to remind myself that because I go back and use it all the time. But even if you like had a binder, you know, would be really helpful. Local seed collection. If a native plant was purchased at a nursery, unknown source, and after a couple of seasons I collect the seed, is that considered local sourcing, or does local sourcing apply only to seed collection from wild sources?
It's a great question.
So that wouldn't hold up for like a restoration planting. However, it is possible, like unless you know where that plant was sourced from the nursery, it is possible that they sourced it from, you know, a nearby watershed. The smaller the nursery, the more likely the seed is sourced locally. So like Nighthawk Natives produces, like Bernie does a lot of her own seed collection and is producing stuff like doing just a lot of her own propagation. Steve with Gila Watershed Partnership is doing his own seed collection. We're doing our own seed collection. It doesn't mean that some of the bigger growers aren't collecting locally. It just totally depends. So like Savano will buy stuff. I'm sure they buy stuff from Bernie with Nighthawk, you know, and that stuff is sourced locally. The problems you get into in the nursery trade is when, and like really, really big box is getting more and more into native plants. But the problem is when you're shipping plant trays all over the West. Like that's how sudden oak death got into California, was from rhododendrons that were shipped in from Asia that headed to California. Like you get into problems then that like becomes more of a problem. But for restoration, you'd want to know where the original source was.
And also, yeah. Sorry, I just want to add too, if you're thinking of like locally sourced, like how we were talking about restoration quality plant materials before, the idea is that you are, yeah, using the seeds or the plant material that has adapted to that area. So I would also say, like, if you don't know when you're getting a plant, but then also if you're like having it in your yard and you are taking care of it in a different way from season to season, it's also like, I guess it's like being babied in a different way. Where I don't know for how long, even then after, like how many generations of seed reproduced from that plant is going to have the same kind of like local adaptation type of genetics that you're going to want to use for like a wildlands planting. That's a great question though, because it is kind of like, what is wild and what is local?
I know, that's a great question. Yeah, for restoration, we just like wild collect, make it simpler. Jesus Garcia has an awesome comment about air layering. Air layering is typically done with fruit trees. It works really well with citrus and figs. We are doing experiments with mesquite now.
Ooh.
It's been done in central Mexico with over 70% success. This is a way of cloning interesting trees with good traits for quick turnaround production within 2 to 3 years instead of 6 to 8. We are also working on air layering ironwood.
That's so
It's
cool.
so cool. We just did an air layering workshop at Mission Garden last week during the Mesquite Milling Festival. Oh, that's so cool. And I would have gone to that. We were busy. Oh, that's so cool. I need to look into that more. We don't do that a lot with trees, but that's really, really cool. Native velvet mesquite seed source, not on your website, worried about hybridization in the city. We should do a seed, well, it's raining now.
Yeah.
We'll do seed collection of mesquite at some point. Charlie, let me find out where I got that mesquite. For a project, it was someone out of Phoenix who had done a collection outside of Tucson was the source that I got this like bag of it, and it germinated really, really well, and so far the plants look great. I usually Google it and then look, if I have to ever buy seed, Google it and then find out where they sourced it from, like talk to the collector. Would be great to add protocols to RNGR propagation database. Totally. We would need like a grant and then have an intern like just update, take stuff from our propagation database. That would be awesome. And Elena put the link in there. That's awesome. Milkweed propagation from seed or cuttings. Seed is, they actually, milkweeds are pretty easy to grow from seeds. We've also done a lot of cuttings. They also do find from cuttings, specifically like the Arizona milkweed plants that are a little larger. We've had success with cuttings on like subulata, subverticillata, angustifolia. Seeds are just easy. We sell a lot of milkweed seed. That's one of our, also for anyone interested in making money off native plants, nurseries are great. Everyone likes nurseries. Seeds where it's at for like bang for your buck. If you know, not enough people sell seeds. You can get the permits to get them. And then this Kendra is asking exactly what type of permit and where do you get it from for seed collection. If you're collecting seed on private lands, you don't need anything. You just talk to the landowner just because you don't want to get in trouble with them. But, you know, generally have a relationship with that landowner. There's plenty of private lands. So much of Arizona is public lands. And in that case, you need permits. You want to talk about our public land seed collection permits?
Yeah, we do most of our collections from Forest Service, and that's because we usually have a project on, so we'll have like non-commercial seed collection with them that usually we get permission like through a specific grant or contract, but then we also do have a like non-commercial collection permit. And then in addition to that, we apply for a commercial collection permit from them. And I think you only have to do that. I don't know the exact number, but it's like if you plan on collecting like over a certain amount, because I do think you're also able, like if you were just like, I want to go and get a little pocket full of this thing to try, I think that is allowed. But for the commercial stuff, we do a collection permit, and what you'd have to do, you'd have to reach out to the Forest Service to be like, I want to apply for this collection permit. And then what they have us do, and we were in like many years have done this, and so I'm not sure about how it started, like what you have to fill out, and we've already been partners with the Forest Service for a long time, but what they have you do is they have you list your projected collections by weight and by mountain range. So what we do is we kind of like get a general idea of things that we want to collect, and we do pretty small collections, but ours usually costs about $80 for a year collection permit, and I think it's by like the total weight, so it's maybe like 50 cents per half a pound or something like that. I can't remember, but they make you kind of like project what you think you're going to collect, and then at the end of the year you report on what you did collect, both commercially and non-commercially. Yeah.
And I know that, like talking to Jim Coe, he came by the other day, and he gets, so when we do get larger collections, like Perin's, you know, like 400 or 500 pounds of raw material collection she's managing for the fall, that is already worked into agreement with the Forest Service because it's for restoration on Forest Service land. Jim Coe, who sells his seed commercially, he has it all permitted, and he's complained before about like, you know, like how tricky it is when you are getting a larger amount to then retail, because I don't know how much they end up charging him, but even just like, you know, that's why people don't like working with the feds, is because it can take a really long time to get all the paperwork done. We just have like a good contact and have always been fairly successful with reapplying, and overall, like, yeah, the amount we're collecting,
it's pretty small. I'll have like a list, like I'll say like for the Santa Rita Mountains, my idea is where I'll probably collect, like it'll be Adobe Canyon and Casablanca Canyon, and then I'll have a list and it will be like 0.15 a pound, which is already for some species that's like, I'm not going to get that much even for some tiny little penstemon seeds or something, but it does add up. So what I usually do is do like a broader array of species just to cover whatever I might run into and want to collect at really small weights. But like if you're going to do bigger weights, I don't know how easy it would be.
but even like taking that seed and selling it, the markup is huge, because if you look at like little individual seed packets, and this is something that the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance with Bill McDormand, he used to have a wild seed business, it just is like so low upfront cost. The packaging is like easily stored, and you then like end up not putting very many seeds per packet and selling them for like a fairly large amount. Like if you can get $5 for a little seed packet, and then you're like moving seeds places, like most of the people that buy our stuff are all local people, except like the milkweed. We have like these milkweed stalkers, and they're like checking in all the time about what milkweeds we have, and we do ship those other places because they're obsessed with milkweeds. But thinking about it, like those live here in the seed lab. We don't have to water them. They don't, like, nothing happens to them once they're put in their little packaging. Worst, we have them in cold storage. The worst thing that could happen is maybe 20 years go by and then they're not good anymore. But in terms of like where we make money, we spend so much money at the nursery, like dealing with all these problems, and the seed packaging is really where it's at. It's so important. Charlie says, do you have a calendar for dates on when to collect seeds for different plants? We don't have like a huge calendar. Perin can talk about that. At this point, Perin's just like an old hat at knowing, but so much of it is monitoring.
Yeah, so much of it is just like doing it year after year after year, and like you just get your like handful of places that and you just have, I have like a running idea in my head of like where we collected when, because we do also try to like, at least for species that have populations that are smaller, so maybe not like our massive grassland populations, but like smaller forbs, we try not to collect like 2 seasons in a row. So I have a running idea in my head of like where we collected when. And then you're always finding, like when you're driving around monitoring the phenology on plants, you just like find new spots all the time. But then you also just like, I know when I collect which species, but we don't have a set calendar. For here, it's like the majority of our plants, we have 2 rainy seasons, like I talked about, the cool season and the warm season plants. And the majority of our plants flower after monsoon rain, because that's like the majority of our precipitation, right, in southern Arizona. And especially where we are, we work a lot with like native perennial bunch grasses for erosion control and watershed restoration. And pretty much like all of our perennial bunch grasses, except for a few species, are summer flowering and fall seeding. So that's like our biggest push is the very end of September through like the very beginning of December. And then we do like a smaller collection in May and June for the spring flowering stuff. So usually it starts, this year stuff was flowering a little bit late. And it was a rough season because of the drought, but it was also like stayed colder longer at nights here. So we had like late flowering, and then we've been collecting seeds pretty much like all in June. But we're also like a little bit higher elevation. So around Tucson, you might start like a little bit earlier. So maybe it's more like May for spring. But no, I don't have like a public list. Maybe that's something I could work on.
And it would probably be one of those things where you have like, I don't know, a bunch of different species and have the the blocks of like, but it just does come down to like, you have to go out and scout. That's one reason our like project management for the seed collection takes a lot of time, is because you're spending a ton of miles driving around everywhere looking at plants, which is the coolest job ever.
That's really cool.
But is also, you just have to be on top of it, and you can't guess. And that's one reason we like the grow out setup a lot more, is because it's right there at the nursery, and so you can check every day and you're like, oh, the milkweed's ready to collect, and you're already driving out to the nursery. So we're way into the grow out fields lately. Perin, another one for you. How do you store your seeds in bulk before packaging?
Do you mean before packaging in like seed packets for commercial sale kind of thing? I'm guessing that's what you mean, Riley. Yes. Oh, we're at the bottom of the questions.
I know.
So we should do, well, at some point, work on this. Basically, we do, the whole setup is we collect seeds, we bring them into the seed lab, we lay them out on tarps and in kiddie pools to dry out like crazy and let all the bugs crawl out. And then we like, sometimes we either temporarily package them up to wait for cleaning, or we like immediately start cleaning them. And that just means separating the seeds from the chaff so that you don't have a bunch of like water holding organic material that's gonna break down and rot in your collection. And then, so we use like screens and separate out the seeds by size and weight. And then we like make sure they're really dry. So we usually do like below 40% humidity, and we package them up. And lately we've been doing like the food grade heat sealed plastic, just because our seed storage is in like a walk-in cooler essentially. So they're not frozen down. They're at like a temperature of 45 degrees about, or maybe like, around there. We try to keep it at 40% humidity, which is easy for all of the year, except for like 2 months right now when it's like really hard to keep the humidity down in Patagonia. But you're still carrying the collections. Like if we're working with the seeds, we're bringing them in and out of the cooler a lot. And so that change in temperature a lot of times can lead to like moisture rushing in if it's an open package or if it's a porous package.
So that's why we do that like food grade to keep the humidity from changing too drastically. But on like a smaller scale, like our setup is short to midterm storage versus like the long-term apocalypse, like end of days freezer Svalbard type of thing, which is like these seeds are going to be for only like when the world has burned up and we have to like restart our food systems. And our seeds are a little bit more like in 5 to 7 years, that's how long they should be in this cooler. And ideally we want them to move through and be used in the landscape. So that's why we have like, that's still like longer than maybe a home seed storage setup. So that's why we use, and we work a lot with federal agencies. So we just like are trying to give them the best environment to like keep their viability for that, about that period. But like you can totally have seeds, especially if they're for your like home use and you don't have like, you know, partners that are really worried about viability rates changing. You can do like cool, dark, dry, any setup as long as you have those 3 things, like pantry level, as long as you have protection from predation, like meaning insects or mice is the biggest thing. So some kind of way that you can contain them from that, and ideally keeping them, like at a low humidity in like a cool, dark type of area. So that can be in the fridge. People use jars a lot, or like manila envelopes, or like brown paper baggies, especially for like vegetable stuff. I feel like, I know I have a home seed collection, or my boyfriend has a home seed collection that's like all in these plastic or paper bags, and we've grown stuff that's like pretty old from that and they're fine. But that's how we do them in a seed lab, is like the slightly more protected from humidity, and then like refrigerator temps.
And yeah, I think we should have like a whole separate workshop just on seeds. I just think not a lot of people do the seeds for some reason. I don't know why, but they're so important. And we're scheduling a time to go see the San Diego Zoo people, because all these California botanic gardens and groups got money from the state of California to preserve like seed genetic diversity of native plants, which is so cool. And I mean, I don't think that's going to happen in Arizona anytime soon, but in the meantime, there are like so many people that really do care about this. And I do think it's important, like, I don't know, it'd be so cool for there to be a lot more seed producers and seed collectors, especially for native things that we could order stuff from and do propagations of. And like, you know, you'd have people with like your specialties of what you produce and what you collect. And then it's not like, you know, we have like long lists of plants, but there's so many cool plants, and there's many of them that we don't need to grow if other people can do a better job, etc. Name of soil mix you get from tanks, green stuff. We don't get a seed mix or a soil mix from them that they have on their list. We just like custom order from them. So we just call like Shota. We used to call Emily, who's at the Mission Garden now. That's how we started hanging out with Emily first. But like, yeah, calling them up and saying they'll put together any mix for really like just the cost of the materials. Buy their succulent mix. They had like a cactus and succulent mix, like, oh, this should be great for the agaves. And it didn't work well at all for the agaves. And I'm actually much happier with the custom mix. And I'm sure, like, you know, they put the mixes together with experts in mind and people that are weighing in. But for whatever reason, like the mix didn't work at our nursery. And so it's really important when picking a mix for your yard or your nursery or whatever you're doing to like, you know, not just take even our word for our mix working perfectly in your space and in your climate, to like try different things. It makes a big difference. I also would like to know more about the soil mix. I'm in El Paso, so we'll need to do it yourself mix. How fine are the cocoa core chips? Is the cinder sand fairly coarse? Do you know what type of compost is used? This is definitely one of the harder things for me to track down. Thanks, Gardenia. And Kevin, yes, we are really lucky in Tucson that we have a place like Tanks that can at least put everything together for us. But often you have to source from like find out who has the compost, you know, where you can get bulk compost delivered from, and then go to different like construction companies often have the ins for like bulk sand. I don't know where they get their cinder sand in, probably from more northern Arizona is my guess, that there's areas up there that have it. But the coconut core, it's the cocoa chips. So there may be like 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch chips with some then like pieces of coconut, but it's a general mix. And I don't know, in Texas, I don't know where you would get that.
And I think their compost is like the city green waste even, right?
Yeah, what's the parent company? The Fairfax companies is like the parent composting company, and then Tanks does the compost or something like that. But it's like these larger industrial companies that put together materials. And it's so nice because Tanks delivers even to Patagonia, which is really, really nice for us. Because otherwise there's like the Sierra Vista, you know, landfill that also does some composting. Yeah, for you, Kevin, in El Paso, it's probably like, I don't know, maybe have you talked to local nurseries about where they source potting soil? Are there El Paso nurseries? Yeah. Yeah, I know. A lot of nurseries just like get in liners from other places. Let's see. Tanks does have cinder sand. I don't know where they source it, but they like we'll often have to wait for it. But yeah, they have the cinder sand hookup.
Oh, Cynthia also says, well, that Cynthia's college sells compost for soil mixes, and if you, Kevin, if there's a like environmental school at like a local college, that they may be somebody worth reaching out to, because sometimes they have like the university compost programs.
Yeah,
maybe not for the rest of the materials, but for compost.
And a lot of landfills do it more and more. I don't know. They're hard to, people have wanted us to do compost stuff in Patagonia, and it's just too much to manage. So I am happy that we have a local group that does it. You guys are so wonderful.
I know, thanks for sticking through.
Yeah, thanks for sticking through. And we also invite all of you, whether you're listening to this recording or here in person, come visit the nursery. We'd love to have you. It'd be great if you didn't come in the next 2 weeks, just because we are trying to take some time off. But yeah, come to the plant sale. That'll be really fun. But after the plant sale, we'll have regular hours that we're open. But during that like regular hour time that we're open, send us an email. And if you can't come at that time, or you want to come at a different weekend or whatever, just email us. We love showing people around and talking plants with people. Oh, Kevin, that's so cool. We need to go. One of our favorite people is from El Paso, who interned with us last summer. And it's been interesting having our native plant nursery here in Southern Arizona, because a ton of West Texas people reach out all the time. And I think it'd be really cool to have a little Flora Fronteriza border nursery network for a lot of the same species that we grow. And I think that would be just really, really cool. Yeah, please stay in touch. We'll offer, it's hard for Perin to do the like fall class on seed collection, because that's when she's like running around collecting seed. But we had a really successful spring one. And so maybe this winter or spring we'll do one.
Or maybe we could do like a volunteer collection day, or it could be like a field workshop that's just the seed collection versus the full like laboratory show off the storage. It would be fun to get out in the field with people who are interested.
Yeah, and we probably will keep doing virtual classes. We love having the in-person ones, but it does make such a difference that, like, you know, traveling is so expensive. And for all our Mexico workshops with some of our different programs in Mexico, it's been having the virtual stuff does work great, and we can't wait to meet people in person again, especially down there. But we're definitely gonna, going forward, do both and have online stuff every year and have in-person things, because it works really well. It works really well. All right, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it and your time, and thank you.
Have a great day. Enjoy the rain. Hopefully we all get some.
I know. Bye.